Chapter 329. After walking down the steps, the surroundings seemed a little dark and empty. The window was located above the head, but the light that came through was limited. There were many slaves from the 3 major cities around here, probably to prevent any accidents. After seeing Xiao Xian, those people stopped and asked. When they heard that he was going to play in the next game, they saw Ai Shi take out a wooden card given by the Luoya City King. They simply let him go, but they also reminded him, "You can't go in now. You have to wait, there are people from Baisher City over there." Xiao Xian looked over. At the entrance of the passage, there were indeed more than a dozen people from Baisher City. Xiao Xian wanted to see if there was Lei and Tuo in the passage, but he was stopped before he got close. Baisher City and Luoya City were disgusted with each other and had a lot of grievances. When Ai Shi took Xiao Xian down, he also called people to follow. Now the 2 sides were confronting each other at the entrance of this passage. "Is there anyone else in the next game?" Xiao Xian asked loudly. If Lei and Tuo were in the passage, they would respond. Sure enough, after Xiao Xian's voice fell, Tuo's voice came from the passage. "Xian." Probably Tuo wanted to come out, but he was stopped. "Xian, what are you doing here?" "Leave," Tuo hurriedly said. "What are you shouting for?" The voice of the Baisher City people came from the passage, followed by the sound of fighting. Xiao Xian's eyes were sharp, and he kicked the nearest Baisher City person. This kick also ignited the line of fire on both sides of Baisher City and Luoya City. The 2 sides looked at each other and suddenly fought. The guards of the 3 major cities around yelled and ran over, violently pulling the 2 sides apart. When the 2 sides stopped fighting because of the intervention of the guards of the 3 major cities, Xiao Xian had already entered the passage. In the passage, the light was dimmer, but it was enough for Xiao Xian to see the situation inside. Tuo was standing against the wall. Perhaps he had just had a brief fight with the Baisher City people. He was standing there gasping for breath. Next to Tuo, Lei was sitting on the ground, and it seemed that the situation was not good. He checked Rei's condition. His life was not in danger for the time being. Only a few of his ribs were broken, and his internal organs were injured. Xiao Xian gave Tuo and Lei some of the medicine he had with him, and then looked at the others around him. Yes, in addition to Lei and Tuo, there were 4 people Xiao Xian knew. 2 of them were from the Feather Tribe, and the other 2 were from the Tian Shan tribe. All 4 of them had different degrees of injuries. In addition to them, there were 4 other slaves with whip scars on their bodies. One of them had been chopped off at the wrist. It was estimated that they were the guilty slaves who had committed a crime and were thrown here by Baisher. Xiao Xian only knew that there were many people in the wooden box in Baisher City. He was not sure whether Lei and Tuo were in it. Now it seemed that not only Lei and Tuo, but also the other 4 tribesmen and the guilty slaves. Including Lei and Tuo, Baisher City had prepared a total of 10 people, all of whom were going to play in the 4th game. To be exact, they were the sacrifices prepared for the 4th game. After all, in the current state of these 10 people, it was impossible to win against a specially prepared fighting beast. Taking advantage of this time, Tuo told Xiao Xian about how they were caught that day. It was because they saw the Feather Tribe and the Tian Shan tribe that they fell into the Baisher people's trap. Also, Tuo's face was solemn. "Xian, that day I also saw the symbol of the Wancher tribe. The Wancher tribe had a relationship with the slave owners." Xiao Xian had long known that, but he did not expect that the connection was with the Baisher people. Were they all stones? In addition to these, we also saw Dao Yu. Tuo couldn't bear to mention it. Lei and I couldn't beat him. Lei's injuries were caused by Dao Yu. Being beaten like this by a traitor who was once a wanderer, Lei and Tuo felt that they had lost Yanjiao's face. They had no face to see the shaman and the chief. Now, in front of Xiao Xian, they also hung their heads low. Now is not the time to talk about this. Seize the time to regulate your breathing. Xiao Xian said. Tuo and Lei wanted to say something, but were stopped by Xiao Xian. The remaining herbs were distributed to several other people by Xiao Xian. The spirit of the 4 people of the Feather Tribe and the Tian Shan tribe was not very good, especially the 2 people of the Feather Tribe. They were very young and had never experienced such a thing, with uneasiness and frustration. The people of the Tian Shan tribe did not have bows and arrows in their hands, and they felt that their confidence was greatly reduced. When they joined the travel team, they thought that they might die, but they never thought that they would face such a situation. Beast City. They would rather be eaten by beasts in the desert than die in such a place in humiliation. Suicide? It seemed that they did not have the courage. Lei and Tua had the courage to commit suicide, but they were not reconciled. Wasn't it just a beast fight? If they wanted to fight, then they would fight. For them, fighting to death was better than committing suicide. In the battlefield separated by a door, the sound of the beast fight clearly passed into everyone's ears, and their hearts trembled. The legs of a young warrior of the Feather Tribe were shaking, and this was after their experience. If it was before the desert experience, they probably would have been unable to bear the pressure and howled. Escape from here. It was not that they didn't think about it, but at the end of the passage, there were layers of guards, and there were archers waiting above, so there was no way to break out. And what about them? They didn't even have a stone in their hands. How to fight? Were they looking for death? The vibration on the other side of the door was getting smaller and smaller, and it was not as fierce as before. After a few howls of beasts, everyone realized that the third game was coming to an end. When everything calmed down, the passage was so quiet that even the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Even the sound of everyone's breathing could be heard clearly. There was a wind blowing, with decay and blood, as well as a chill that made people nervous and tremble. Not long after, a group of people holding weapons came from the entrance of the passage. The man in the lead had a malicious smile, pointing at Xiao Xian and others with the tip of his knife. It's time to go in. This sounded like, it's time to go on the road. Rumble. The heavy stone door opened, and the dazzling light made the people who stayed in the passage couldn't help but reach out to block it. Although some sand would be replaced after the end of each game in the battlefield, the blood left by the previous battles could not be erased. The guards behind urged them to go to the battlefield. If they didn't go, they would swing their knives, but they were blocked by Xiao Xian. The guard who was blocked wanted to make 2 more knives, but Xiao Xian said, "Why, do you want to go in with us?" The guard's movement paused and stepped back. He didn't want to go in and fight with the fighting beasts. Xiao Xian didn't look at the others and walked into the battlefield. Lei and Tua followed closely. The 4 people of the Yu tribe and the Tianshan tribe looked at each other and could only lift their feet and walk in. The last 4 slaves were kicked into the battlefield by the guards. The heavy stone door closed, blocking their way back. Pa. More than a dozen stone knives were thrown from the upper stands. The edges of the knives were sharpened, and the stone was good, medium, and high. Several people who entered the field quickly grabbed a knife in their hands. The stone door at the other end of the battlefield opposite them opened with a bang, and a giant beast with conical thorns walked into the field unhurriedly. At the same time, on the other side of the Colosseum, where the fighting beasts entered the passage, there was a tall building where various fighting beasts that were about to participate in the Colosseum were locked up. They were opened and closed separately, and in one of the single rooms where the fighting beasts were locked, a beetle broke through the ground. Chapter 330. In the place where the fighting beasts were kept, in a warehouse-like house, a giant beast was lying there quietly. It was a bull with big pointed horns, and if the outside light was good, one could see the brown fur. It was the fighting beast that had appeared every year in Red Star City for the past 5 years, winning 5 battles. Because some of the patterns on its back were like flames, it was also called the Flame Bull by the people of Red Star City. This Flame Bull had been enslaved by the Red Star City Lord, and it was not the first time it had participated in the Colosseum. It had even been used as the finale many times. The sound from the Colosseum made it annoyed, but it was not crazy. There were also some drugs around that could make them temporarily calm down. There was not much light coming through the few holes in the slate, but the dim environment did not have much impact on it. Suddenly, it heard movement on the ground and looked over, only to see a bug crawling out of the ground. The Flame Bull did not pay attention to it. After looking at it, it continued to rest and prepare for the next battle. Just a bug, why bother looking? However, it did not pay attention to it. The bug was restless, biting and scratching every once in a while, and it was becoming more and more rampant. The shaking of the bull's tail could not expel it. The speed of the bug was quite fast. It was annoying. In order to participate in the battle, it would be hungry for a day or 2 like most of the fighting beasts. Although there would still be food supply in these days, it was much less than the previous careful breeding. In addition, after coming to the Colosseum, it had not eaten its favorite kind of grass. In the past, when it was in Red Star City, there were slaves who transported the grass every few days. But after coming here, it could only eat hay and some other plants that did not taste good. It was a little hot. The flame bull's two big nostrils spewed out hot air, and its calm mood was faintly fluctuating. On the other side, in the Colosseum, Xiao Xian looked at the horned lizard beast that walked into the battlefield. Its body was flat, and its torso was oval. From a distance, it looked like a toad with thorns, but there was a tail behind it that was not long. The back of this horned lizard beast was dark sand, and its whole body was covered with thorny scales, like a sharp spearhead like armor. In addition to those cone-shaped thorns, there were also some coarse scaled thorns. The horned lizard beast looked very fierce, especially the sharp short thorns. Even if it was only used for defense and not attack, it was enough to give people a headache. The horned lizard beast moved its four limbs and walked to the center of the battlefield. The roars from the surrounding stands made it very uncomfortable. It turned its stubby neck and swept around. Then its sight fell on Xiao Xian and the others. It had a reddish-brown head, and there were some dried red marks around its eyes, which made its eyes look even more strange, especially when it glanced at Xiao Xian and the others. Looking into those eyes, Xiao Xian could hear the people behind him gulping. He could even hear their hearts beating faster. Even Lei and Tuo, who had hunted for many years, could not maintain the mentality of the previous hunting. There was no shelter around. This was a completely direct confrontation. The giant beast in the middle of the battlefield opened its mouth and roared at Xiao Xian and the others. The sound was not as high-pitched as the previous beasts, nor was it the kind of heavy thunder drum sound. It was like the sound of a storm sweeping through the sand dunes. It made people feel their hair stand on end. With the roar, the rapid airflow blew up the sand on the battlefield. The oncoming sand made everyone's eyes narrow, but they did not dare to move away. They were afraid that if they moved, they would miss the opportunity to escape. "Xian, what should we do?" Tuo asked. "Wait first." Xiao Xian observed the horned lizard beast, recalling the information Su Gu gave him to determine the feasibility of the strategy. He didn't really want to fight with such a fierce beast here. If he really fought with his life, the already injured Lei and Tuo would not be spared. From the previous two battles, he could see the destructive power of the fighting beasts in the battlefield. Especially Lei, who probably endured the pain while running, so his movement was naturally severely limited. After the horned lizard beast in the battlefield roared, it moved its four limbs and sped up its pace. It went to the place where Xiao Xian and the others were. With every step, a lot of sand was kicked up. Xiao Xian and the others had not yet moved, but the four slaves in the back began to shout and run away. The horned lizard beast was originally heading in the direction of Xiao Xian and the others, but when it saw the people running away, it put its attention on the people running. Looking at its cumbersome body, each step was huge, and within a few steps, it had already caught up with the slave running in the front. The horned lizard beast did not stretch out its relatively short limbs, nor did it swing its not-so-long tail. Instead, it directly slid and floated sideways, hitting the stone wall next to it. Boom! Sand and stones splashed, and the stones on the edge of the wall were hit by the hard horns on its body. A lot of stone chips fell off. The slave running in the front was sandwiched between the horned lizard beast and the wall of the battlefield. One could imagine his end. The rest of the people felt their breathing stagnant, and the hand holding the knife was shaking. The courage that they had just gathered was scattered into slag under this collision. "Oh, dash good!" "Oh, dash!" In the surrounding stands, the young slave owners were so excited that their faces turned red, and when they roared wildly, their faces looked ferocious. They heard that in addition to the four slaves who were obviously tanned, the others were tribal people, and this group of slave owners was even more excited. It turned out to be tribal people. "Kill, kill, kill! Kill them!" The shouts shook the sky. The horned lizard beast that hit the wall twisted its short spotted neck and looked at the others. The slave closest to the horned lizard beast did not dare to run forward again. Seeing the horned lizard beast focus on him, the slave did not have the courage to lift his knife and turn to run. This time he did not run around, but went back, toward the place where Xiao Xian and the others were. But this time, the horned lizard beast did not immediately accelerate to chase. Instead, it took a step and shook off the stone and sand on its body. It did not look at the slave who had been squeezed into a meat patty. Step by step, it walked in the direction of Xiao Xian and the others. Its eyes were slightly closed, and it looked somewhat absent-minded. After the scene just now, no one dared to relax their vigilance. Their nerves were tense, and their hearts were hanging high as they stared at the approaching beast. Looking at the approaching beast, a slave glanced at Xiao Xian and the others who were still standing there. He gritted his teeth and ran out. However, after running a few steps, he stiffly stopped because he found that the horned lizard beast had focused its attention on him. The slave, who was frozen there like a sculpture, maintained his running posture. He did not dare to look directly at the other side. He only observed with his peripheral vision and did not care about the sweat dripping from his forehead. Seeing that the slave was no longer running, the horned lizard beast seemed a little disappointed and put its eyes on the place with the most people. After looking for a while, it suddenly took 2 steps forward. The 4 people of the Yu tribe and the Tian Shan tribe also wanted to stay with the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe so that they could share a lot of the pressure. But looking at the approaching beast, their hearts were also drumming, hesitating whether to stay away. Seeing the horned lizard beast step forward, the thunder-like impact flashed in the minds of several people, and their conditioned reflexes retreated far away. However, the battlefield was circular, and they were already close to the edge. Even if they retreated, they could only retreat along the edge of the circular arc. They thought that the horned lizard beast would make another thunderous impact, but unexpectedly, it took 2 steps, stopped, and roared again. The sand on the ground rushed straight to the place where Xiao Xian and the others were. The 3 slaves could not help but retreat a little. They did not run, but moved step by step, trying not to attract the attention of the horned lizard beast. The people of the Yu tribe and the Tian Shan tribe had already retreated several steps. Now facing the impact of the sand, they retreated again. In this way, the closest to the beast were the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe. Seeing this scene, the other 7 of the remaining 10 people in the field obviously took a breath. In any case, the first to face the attack of the beast must be the 3 of them. Tuo and Lei focused on Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian did not move, and they did not move. The outer cloth was blown back by the wind. Xiao Xian pulled the hat on his head and lifted his foot in the direction of the beast. Xiao Xian moved, and Lei and Tuo also moved. Probably feeling that Xiao Xian issued an attack signal, Lei rushed forward with a knife. If it was during the hunt, he would not be so impulsive, but here, the pressure brought by the atmosphere pulled his nerves. After seeing the beast, he did not even think about leaving. Death is death. At least try to create some opportunities for Xiao Xian and Tuo. If they could hurt the beast a few times, it would be better. However, Lei, who was going to try his best to fight, had not run a step and was thrown to Tuo by Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian lowered his voice and said quickly, "You 2 stay here first. If I can't stop it later, you can act according to the situation." Tuo still wanted to say something, but Xiao Xian waved his hand and continued to go to the beast. "What is he going to do?" A person of the Yu tribe said. "Is he crazy?" A person of the Tian Shan tribe recalled that in the tribe, when the shaman heard the news of the Yanjiao tribe, his evaluation was that the Yanjiao people were like lunatics. Now it seemed that the Yanjiao people were really crazy. They did not even avoid it, but went forward. Not only the other people on the battlefield, but even the slave owners in the stands also felt that the man in the strange hooded cloth was looking for death. Xiao Xian, regardless of what other people thought, still went forward. His long sleeves covered his hands, so that people could not see whether he had a weapon or not. Xiao Xian did not retreat, but moved forward, making the beast stunned. It also did not care about other people, and its 2 slightly closed eyes opened a little bit, staring at the approaching people. Others could not feel it, but it could clearly perceive the man's increasing momentum with each step. 20 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters. Xiao Xian could even smell the muddy smell of the beast's breath. The beast looked at the approaching people, roared, and raised a front paw, about to slap Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian was faster, and also raised an arm. All the momentum that had been accumulating in this moment burst out. In his mind, the totemic flame fiercely rolled, and the outer shell of the totemic flame became brighter. 5 beams of blue flame came out of the inside, like dragons coming out of the sea. They swam along the meridians, unstoppable, rushed over the arm, and emerged from the front of the 5 fingers of the raised arm. Whoosh! The blue flame wrapped around the palm. The moment the flame appeared, the sand raised by the beast's roar, with Xiao Xian as the center, quickly shook out layers of visible ripples in all directions. Chapter 331. This was the first time that Xiao Xian showed the blue flame in public. Although this was not a good idea, after revealing the blue flame, he would certainly be targeted by more slave owners. However, after thinking about it, this was the best way. After the blue flame appeared, the slave owners, who were originally excited in the stands, seemed to be strangled one by one. That is. Isn't he a tribesman? How could there be a slave owner? Yes, who is that guy? I can't see clearly with a hat. As slave owners, they knew what such a blue flame represented since they were sensible. If they could not make such a blue flame, they would not be a real slave owner. Such a blue flame was a symbol of slavery. It was the proof of a slave owner. Not only the young slave owners, but even the several city lords could not help but straighten up. The people who were still sitting lazily, absent-mindedly tasting the wine, and the people who were intimate with the beautiful concubines, all turned their eyes to the battlefield. In particular, Su-gu, who originally had some worries, was now so shocked that his jaw almost fell. Slave owner? What a slave owner! No one knew better than him that Xiao Xian was a tribesman. A real tribesman. When he was in the oasis, he also saw Xiao Xian's totem pattern. How could he be a slave owner? At this time, Su-gu suddenly remembered that Xiao Xian had asked him a question. Can a tribesman enslave a slave? How did he answer at that time? Impossible? Su-gu stretched his neck and looked at the scene on the battlefield. He rubbed his eyes. It was indeed the blue flame. On the Baisher side, Dao Yu, who originally saw Xiao Xian on the field, was still sneering in his heart. He wanted to see the tragedy of the three people. At this moment, his face changed again and again. He now suddenly regretted it. How could he ignore such a person? He was sure that the kid was a real tribesman. Because of this, his heart was faintly worried and afraid. If he had known this, he would certainly not hesitate to get rid of this big threat first. The Baisher king now wanted to throw his cup. What about a tribesman? How could he become a slave owner? What? You said that was a tribesman. Bastard! Do you think I don't have eyes? Could the tribesman be enslaved? Could the tribesman make such a blue fire? Fuck! That fire is even bigger than mine. The White Stone King felt suffocated. Several slaves around caught a glimpse of the White Stone King's gloomy eyes and quickly lowered their heads for fear of being angered. However, the White Stone King loves his face. Even if the arrangement goes wrong, he has to endure it for the time being. He can't fly into a rage immediately. Otherwise, he will be laughed at by the other city lords for his ability to control the situation. Therefore, Baisher Wang not only could not vent now, but also had to put on airs, as if everything was under his control. On the battlefield, Xiao Xian faced the giant beast and raised his arm. The flame on his palm floated against the sand and air currents towards the giant beast. He was like a predator that had smelled delicious food, ready to make a move. The horned lizard beast lifted its thick forelimb. At the moment when the blue flame appeared, it froze. The roar stopped and roared again, several times in a row, as if to demonstrate to Xiao Xian. To be able to get a giant desert beast to demonstrate its power, it must have classified them as a threat. The previous roars were just its way of venting and teasing. Now the roar was a show of force. It stared at Xiao Xian, looking at the blue flame with fear. Xiao Xian raised his head slightly. Because of the hat on his head, the people standing on the high platform could not see Xiao Xian's face, but the giant beast saw it. On Xiao Xian's face, the dark totem patterns that were originally exposed became as red as magma. If there were no clothes to cover it, you could see that the totem patterns in other places on Xiao Xian's body were similar. After a series of roars, the giant beast lifted its forelimb and moved. Just when the people in the stands thought that the giant beast would show its power and smash the boy who dared to show the enslavement flame in front of it into a meat patty, they found that the truth was not what they thought. The giant beast's raised forelimb not only did not move forward, but fell back. It was retreating. Such a giant beast, it actually retreated. People who have enslaved fighting beasts know that they will resist when enslaved. So many people will let slaves help control them when enslaving them. But what about the one off the field? Why did it retreat? This was only known to the horned lizard beast that faced Xiao Xian at close range. Those who were far away would not be able to feel the power, but it could clearly feel it. No, it can't go over. So, it chose to retreat, roaring as it retreated, as if facing a great enemy. Taking a step back shows that it is timid and afraid. At this time, Xiao Xian once again took a step forward, even more imposing and decisive than before. The blue flame in his hand once again floated to the giant beast's side. Xiao Xian knew that after this horned lizard beast was caught, it became cautious and ate a loss. Naturally, its attitude towards people was more careful. After entering the battlefield, the first step it did was just to test the strength of the people on the field and the hardness of the surrounding walls. The people here did not seem to be strong and did not pose much of a threat. It also tested the hardness of the walls and found that it was difficult to break. It temporarily put its eyes on Xiao Xian and the others, wanting to vent. But now it was aware of the threat, but the line of its heart did not collapse. At this time, it could not show fear and hesitation. The more powerful Xiao Xian was, the more the giant beast would doubt itself. Yes, Su Gu said that this beast was very smart, but the smarter it was, the more it would think. It was not like some fighting beasts, which were straightforward and did not think much about the style of fighting directly. Dao Yu and the people of Baisher City did not think that they would deliberately pick such a tricky beast, but instead it helped Xiao Xian. Listening to the roar of the giant beast now, compared to the strength at the beginning, it now sounded like a fierce appearance but weak inside. Seeing Xiao Xian pressing on, it continued to move back. Its tail hit the wall, so it had to turn in another direction and continue to retreat. The successive roars continued to lift the sand on the ground, as if to blow out the fire in Xiao Xian's hand. However, this round of sandstorms could not break through this layer of barrier. Moreover, the fire from the fire seed could not be blown out by the wind and covered by the sand. How could it be extinguished by the roar of a fierce beast? One retreated, one advanced. Xiao Xian pushed the horned lizard beast from one side of the battlefield, step by step, to the middle of the battlefield, and continued to push. It was not only the other people on the battlefield who were stunned, but even the countless experienced slave owners in the stands who were watching the war were also stunned. What was this situation? This beast city rarely seen in hundreds of years. Who the hell is that kid? He looks more arrogant than the Snowfield's young master. Could it be that Baisher City specially arranged this? Is it one of the Baisher City's young masters? Whoever he is, hurry up and fight. That fighting beast. It's a waste to have such a fierce appearance. The slave owners in the stands did not know what expression to show. There were even people who threw items in their hands, such as pottery, stone tools, etc., at the giant beast in the battlefield, trying to arouse the giant beast's anger. However, after being smashed, the giant beast was indeed angry, but it was not directed at Xiao Xian. Instead, it turned its head in the direction of the smashing. It roared angrily, and the airflow rushed to the stands. The young slave owners who threw things in the stands quickly pulled the slaves around them in front of them. After roaring at the stands, the horned lizard beast turned its head and continued to retreat until its tail touched the wall of the battlefield. Xiao Xian had forced the giant beast from one side of the battlefield to the other side of the battlefield. There was no way to retreat. Some places around the giant beast's eyes began to stir, and its eyes even began to turn red. Xiao Xian guarded against the giant beast's final counterattack. He saw the changes around the giant beast's eyes become more and more obvious. The sense of swelling became stronger and stronger, and the redness around the eyes became more and more intense. Whoosh, two blood-colored liquids splashed from the giant beast's eyes. The battlefield exuded a strange smell of blood. Although it did not feel very unpleasant, it inexplicably made people feel that their stomachs were stirred, which was quite uncomfortable. It was not only the people on the battlefield. The wind carried the smell and drifted to the high stands. The slave owners who had been eating and drinking before directly vomited. Those who did not vomit also had a face full of vegetables. They could not wait to find a place to avoid it. However, the Luoya City King Su Luan laughed out loud at this time. He was happy to see the people of Baisher City suffer. No need to watch anymore. This fourth game is over. In the desert, if the horned lizard beast encountered a beast that it could not match, it would spray blood from its eyes to drive away the beast that posed a threat to its life. This horned lizard beast, when it was besieged and captured by the people of Baisher City, also had such a situation because it was extremely afraid. The red marks around its eyes when it was on the field were left behind at that time. Now, just one person made its eyes bleed again. To what extent was this fear? And on the field, who was the person who forced the horned lizard beast into this field? Even the Luoya City King was puzzled. Was it really from the tribe? In any case, when they saw the horned lizard beast's eyes bleed, the experienced people knew that this beast fight could not go on. It would be a waste of time to drag it out. However, although he understood it in his heart, the Snowfield King was not very pleasing to the eyes of the mysterious person on the field who was better than his son. He waved his hand. This fighting beast is not good. It has ruined everyone's interest. The Snowfield King's words were a naked slap in the face of the Baishur King. Before the start of this game, the Baishur King had said that he would make everyone happier. And the result? The words spoiled everyone's mood were two merciless slaps on Baishur King's face, which was loud enough. He did not look at the Baishur King, who was full of hostility. As the person who presided over the overall situation of this year's beast fight, the Snowfield King thought that Baishur City was a poor ghost. Catching such a good-for-nothing waste was really disappointing. In that case, I will let you see the ability of my Snowfield City. Change it to my Snowfield's fighting beast. Standing up, the Snowfield King cleared his throat. Although the Colosseum was big, he could let his voice spread to every part of the stands. Since the Baishur King's beast is a waste, then my Snowfield City will make up for it. Come. The Snowfield King's words had not yet finished when he heard a beast cry not far away. Moo! The Snowfield King, who was interrupted, was slightly angry in his heart. With an unhappy face, he paused and continued. Come, bring. Moo. There was another beast cry, this time louder than the previous one. The Snowfield King's face was even more unhappy. He snorted discontentedly and then said, Bring us. Moo. This third sound even overwhelmed the voice of the Snowfield King. Interrupted one after another, the Snowfield King was so angry that he threw his cup and stared at the Red Star City side. This cry was from the flame bull of the Red Star City side. Although they were far away and there was a battlefield between them, the Red Star City Lord could still feel the sharp gaze that was like a substance. Many people from other cities also looked at the Red Star City side. With a slight cough, the Red Star City King turned around and said a few words to a few capable people next to him, letting them take care of it, but not to hurt the bull. Turning his head and not speaking, there was another loud roar of the beast. Others looked at the Red Star City King. The Red Star City King was about to say, I have already sent people over. But just as he was about to speak, he suddenly slammed on the brakes. That's not right. This cry is not from our family's bull, it's more like the one from Snowfield. Hearing this, everyone looked in the direction of Snowfield City. Standing there against the wind, the Snowfield King, wearing a white fur coat, was particularly conspicuous. The Snowfield King, whose face was blue because of the interruption, was even more blue now. Chapter 332. The first three cries that interrupted the Snowfield King's words were indeed from the famous flame bull of Red Star City. However, the following cries were not. The Snowfield King really could not refute this. How could he know that before he could say a few words, his own fighting beast would tear down his stage? The Snowfield King's cloudy face was full of anger. He raised his hand and waved. The two slaves around him quickly withdrew to deal with the fighting beast and see what was going on over there. Seeing the two big slave owners of Red Star City and Snowfield City lose face, the Baishur City Lord had long had a face full of vegetables. The slave owners of several other cities were gloating in their hearts. You deserve it. Who told you to blindly show off? However, they did not show off for long. Soon, a series of beast roars sounded, not only from the bull of Red Star City and the fighting beast of Snowfield City, but also other cries. The roars of the beasts were getting more and more intense, louder and louder. The people here were all experienced people and knew a lot about fighting beasts. Even if they were not clear about their daily habits, they could feel the emotions expressed by the sound. At this moment, the continuous roars of the beasts were full of anger and irritation, as if they were going to turn the world upside down. Accompanied by the sound of impact, it was like the fighting beasts were hitting a stone wall. This was not a good thing. What's going on? This time, they could not sit still and no longer paid attention to the battlefield. Is it possible that there is a fight in the beast pen? Several of our city's beasts are over there. Hurry up and send someone over to see. Pay attention. Even if you hurt others, you can't hurt the fighting beasts of our own city. The beast war is not over yet. All the big and small slave owners let the slaves around them check the situation. The Snowfield King looked at the already chaotic stands and took a deep breath. Everyone be quiet. This roar successfully attracted the attention of the slave owners, and the noisy field suddenly quieted down. Seeing this, the Snowfield King was a little satisfied. Looking at the situation in the battlefield, he raised his hand and reluctantly said, "The fourth beast war is over. Prepare for the fifth." As for the hooded man who could send out the enslavement fire, they would send someone to understand. In a hurry, it was better to stabilize the field. Inside the battlefield, 2 heavy doors opened. Originally, they thought that they would not be able to get out alive after entering. However, when they saw the heavy stone door slowly opening, they felt a kind of excitement. The 3 slaves took the lead and rushed out. The 4 people of the Feather tribe and the Tian Shan tribe looked at the 3 people of the Flaming Horns tribe and quickly walked out. Xiao Xian watched the horned lizard beast being pulled out by nearly 20 sturdy high-level slaves with thick rattan ropes. The giant beast was also very happy to be able to leave this place, so it did not resist and was very cooperative. Since the beginning of the beast battle, even the fighting beasts that could get out of here were all injured and exhausted. It was rare to see such a fighting beast that almost maintained the same appearance as when it entered the arena. The only difference was that it was bleeding again. When the giant beast left, Xiao Xian turned around and went to the other door with Lei and Tuo. When they walked out of the door, Xiao Xian quickly whispered to Lei and Tuo, "Let Cha-Cha take you away later. It will soon be chaotic here, and no one will take care of us for the time being." Lei and Tuo looked at Xiao Xian in surprise. They did not quite understand the meaning of Xiao Xian's words. However, since Xiao Xian said so, they would do as he said. The scene on the battlefield not only surprised the slave owners, but also the 2 of them. They heard others speculating that Xiao Xian was a slave owner, but they did not believe it. Xiao Xian was a person who was favored by the shaman. He was also an elder of Yanjiao and was recognized by the ancestors. Whether he was a slave owner or not, Xiao Xian was a Yanjiao person anyway. The roar of the beast, as well as the sound of impact, still showed no signs of stopping, but became more and more intense. At this time, in the large warehouse where the flame bull was locked, the flame bull was stomping the ground with its hooves. Damn it, where was the bug that annoyed the dead bull? How did it disappear into the ground? While it was stomping on the ground, the beetle that had driven the flame bull to the brink of insanity had silently drilled out from the corner. It then quickly flew towards the back of the flame bull, grabbed it firmly, and bit it. It even used its hook-like front claws to stab with all its might. The flame bull screamed again. Moo, damn it, the bull was pissed off. Bang! The 2 thick horns on the swinging bull's head once again hit the stone wall next to it. Those stone walls could only block for a while, but they could not withstand the crazy collisions of the fighting beasts. After all, this was not the Colosseum. The people who were sent there to understand the situation listened to the fierce roar and impact, and did not dare to open the stone door so easily. Just as they were thinking about how to calm these fighting beasts down, they heard a bang somewhere. The stone wall of the tall building that had cost a huge amount of manpower and material resources, and had buried hundreds or even thousands of slaves, was finally knocked down. Around the collapsed stone wall, the people standing there saw that the flame bull's eyes had turned into a strange red color, and its big nostrils spurted out a burning breath. The slaves standing outside could clearly see the 2 white streams of air that were spurted out. A small slave owner and more than a dozen slaves rushed to appease the flame bull. When they saw this scene, they said at the same time, "Oh no! What happened in the end that made this bull so angry?" The flame bull had a characteristic. Their eyes would change color with emotion. When its eyes turned red, it meant that it was angry. The darker the color, the greater its anger. At this time, the flame bull's eyes had become almost blood red. It was like a red-hot stone, and whoever caught it would be scalded. This state was very suitable for the battlefield. However, this was not the battlefield, nor was it the time to fight. The flame bull's blood-red eyes looked at the people outside, and its hooves were digging on the ground. As soon as they saw this scene, the people of Red Star City were shocked. "It's going to attack. Go find the king. Quick!" This flame bull was enslaved by the king, and only the king could calm it down. If others wanted to stop it, they could only work together to kill it. But before that, the Red Star City Lord said not to hurt the flame bull, so the solution could only be to find the king. The flame bull let out a long cry, lowered its head, pointed its horns forward, and rushed out. The main culprit who had angered the flame bull had already moved to another place and started the same thing again. There were many fighting beasts in the surroundings. The task that Xiao Xian had assigned to it before was to provoke the anger of the bull. 2 days before the opening of the Colosseum, Xiao Xian wandered around the Colosseum and heard about the flame bull of Red Star City. It had a 5-year winning streak and an irritable temper, which was in line with Xiao Xian's plan. In order to see the beetle's obedience and ability to execute, Xiao Xian also specifically checked it. That day, he had been locked in the house, only occasionally going out to pick up something and then returning to the house again to examine the beetle. He gave the beetle a small piece of a very ordinary branch and let it take it to the ground near the corner outside the house. The beetle also completed the task very well, 3 times in a row, which made Xiao Xian begin to rejoice in enslaving such a beetle. He said to Sapphire that after this matter was over, he would unlock the second lock. In fact, after Xiao Xian determined its ability, he also wanted to unlock the second lock, but the time from the first lock was too short. According to Su Gu, if the time interval between the 2 unlocks of the slaves was too short, it may not be good. There were even cases of death. Therefore, Xiao Xian did not immediately unlock it, but promised to unlock it later. In fact, in addition to the big blue beetle, there were also a large number of beetles in the other places where the fighting beasts were locked. Although they did not pose any threat individually, once the number increased, it would be different. This was also the reason why the other fighting beasts began to be anxious and angry. The Colosseum would be open for 2 to 3 days before and after the full moon, and there were about 10 battles every day. Most of the fighting beasts that appeared in these battles were locked up in the place next to the Colosseum. After all, there may be some small changes before the fighting beasts. Therefore, it was not only the fighting beasts that appeared on the first day, but also the ones that appeared on the second day. And now, these battle beasts that were finally pacified and locked up to prepare for battle were all going crazy. At first, it was only 1 or 2, but soon it was like a chain reaction, driving the mood of the other fighting beasts. The fighting beasts, whose tempers were not very good, became even worse. What's more, this time there was a factor that ignited their anger. Boom! Another stone wall was knocked down. And this was also like a prelude. After this, a stone wall was knocked down and the stone door was knocked open. Under the rage of the fighting beasts, less than 10% of their rationality remained. The first to bear their anger, in addition to the slaves guarding this side, was the Colosseum. However, there were many protections in the Colosseum, and there were also high walls blocking them. They could not attack, so they turned to other directions, rampaging in the Beast City to vent their accumulated anger and murderous intent. The guards of the Beast City were composed of people from the 3 cities. It was impossible to say that they were absolutely harmonious. Coupled with the fact that the loopholes in the order were not very solid at the moment, they were instantly in a mess. The competition in the Colosseum could not be carried out because of the rioting fighting beasts outside. The slave owners, who were still emotional before, did not dare to leave at will. They could only stay here and wait for the king and the slaves to deal with the fighting beasts outside. It was not until the afternoon that the situation outside was barely stabilized. The frightened little slave owners who were hiding in the stands of the Colosseum were no longer in the mood to continue watching the fighting beasts. Under the escort of the slaves, they returned to their respective stations. Xiao Xian's group did not follow them to the Luoya City station. After Su Gu brought the message, they found a place to rest first. "Xian, are we not going to enter the Luoya City station?" Tuo asked. "Not for the time being," Xiao Xian said. "Why? Are you worried about the Luoya City King's suspicion?" "More than that, I'm worried that something big will happen. If it really happens, it's a good opportunity to leave." Xiao Xian looked at the full moon in the sky and said. Chapter 333. The effect of the closed fighting beasts was more intense than Xiao Xian expected. One was that Xiao Xian underestimated the ability of the sapphire, and the other was the weather. When the moon was full, it was the time when the beasts were most prone to riot. However, the slave owners liked to see the furious beasts fighting each other. For them, only in such a situation, the battle was fierce enough and good enough to watch. He just didn't know, after experiencing the collective riot of the fighting beasts, when they went to the Beast City again, would there be a psychological shadow? Xiao Xian stood on the high sand ridge, looking at the distant Luoya City station and the Beast City further away. This night, Lei and Tuo had a rare good sleep. During the time of being caught, they had been on guard, nervous, and always on guard. Until now, with Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha, they were finally relaxed. Sleeping well could restore them quickly. After midnight, Xiao Xian saw a bird flying into Luoya City. Not long after, a small group of people rushed to Luoya City. Looking at their almost silent but fast running, Xiao Xian guessed that these people were sent by the Luoya city king to investigate the news. Something must have happened to make these people rush back in such a hurry. The next day, Xiao Xian went to find Su Gu alone. He did not take Lei and Tua with him, letting them find a place to rest and recuperate. He first determined whether there was someone chasing the three of them. In particular, Dao Yu. Xiao Xian showed his hand in the Colosseum. Even if other people did not care, Dao Yu would certainly have an idea. In such a time when there might be a more intense storm, it was always good to be careful. However, what Xiao Xian did not expect was that he learned a surprising news from Su Gu. The Baisher king is dead? Well, someone came to report last night. Father asked me not to leave the station, and would leave here as soon as possible. Su Gu was a little tired. At first, he was curious as to how Xiao Xian was able to create the enslavement fire. However, under such circumstances, a tribesman was relatively unimportant. What's more, Su Gu now needed Xiao Xian's help. Naturally, it was impossible to push him too hard. Xiao Xian pondered over Su Gu's words. The Baisher city lord, the king of that city, was actually killed? Yesterday, he was still angry in the beast fighting arena. How did he get slaughtered when he returned? Do you know who killed him? Xiao Xian asked. Su Gu shook his head. I don't know. How about Dao Yu? Xiao Xian asked again. I don't know, but I heard that one of the Baisher king's 3 close guards died. After a pause, Su Gu added, it seems that the one who died was not Dao Yu. After the riot in the beast fighting arena, another city lord was killed. This time, the beast fighting arena was doomed to not continue. At first, when he heard the news, the Snowfield king was still clamoring to investigate why the fighting beasts rioted and how the city lord was killed. However, in the afternoon, there was news that the Snowfield king had left with his people. In the original words of the Snowfield king, I have an urgent matter. Whoever wants to care about it, I don't care anyway. What happened in the end that could make the Snowfield king so anxious? Xiao Xian wondered. I heard that the Snowfield city side seems to have lost a very important thing. Su Gu said. A very important thing? Xiao Xian asked. I don't know what it is. I'm still inquiring. However, it is said that it may be related to your tribe. Su Gu said. Xiao Xian's eyelids twitched. What were the hidden purposes of the other tribes? His previous guess was that they were looking for metal ores. Could it be that they had succeeded? The people of the Feather tribe and the Tianshan tribe who came back with them that day had already left overnight yesterday. They did not say hello to the people of Luoya City. Even if he wanted to ask, he could not find anyone. If it's really related to your tribe, then you have to avoid it early. Our Luoya City has taken in a lot of tribes. Su Gu said. Things were the same as what Su Gu said. In the afternoon, near dusk, the Luoya City king gathered his people and left with everyone. There was no one left in the station. Originally, Xiao Xian wanted to let Cha-Cha leave with Lei and Tua first. But Su Gu took the initiative to let Lei and Tua go with them. In the 2 days before and after the full moon, the desert was very dangerous, so it was better to be careful. Xiao Xian thought about it and agreed. On the day they left the beast-fighting desert, the Luoya City king saw the 3 of them and did not say a word. As for Baisher City, after their king was killed, the young masters of Baisher City and the small slave owners left with their slaves. It was too dangerous here, so it was better to go back to the city first and then fight for the throne. Not only Baisher City and Luoya City, but people from several other cities also left one after another. They seemed to be aware of the coming storm and left in a hurry. The people of several cities left, leaving only the original guards of Beast City. The guards of the 3 cities were already on guard against each other. A Snowfield City guard left here went out to release water at night. The desert at night was bright because of the moon in the sky. The guard went to a beast fighting pit. There were a lot of beast corpses piled up in the pit. Most of them were the losers of the beast fighting war in the past 2 days. If it was in the past, these corpses would have been given to the slaves to eat. But now they had all withdrawn, leaving too many corpses behind. They were all thrown in a beast fighting pit. After another 10 days, only the bones would be left. There were scavenger birds and other insects around, which would digest these corpses. Yawning, the guard looked around. Except for his own companions not far away, he did not find other people from other cities. This made him feel relieved, and he planned to urinate. Just as he was about to urinate, he suddenly heard some fine sounds. He quickly looked around and found no other abnormalities. Then he listened carefully. Those sounds were coming from under the beast fighting pit. Could it be that there were still beasts in the pit that had not died? Thinking of the riot in the beast-fighting pit, the guard swallowed his saliva. He held the handle of his knife and stretched his neck to look inside. Then, he saw some black beetles coming out from under the beast-fighting pit. One by one, they quickly wrapped up the corpses of the beasts piled up at the top. If that was all, the guard found that the corpses of the beasts in the pit were quickly thinning. The originally strong muscles became dry at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even if he had seen the scavengers in the desert quickly eliminate the corpses, it was also caused by the joint action of many birds and other animals of all sizes. But now, in this pit, there was only one kind of beetle. They were frantically gnawing, and the black armor on their backs reflected the cold white light of the moon. He had guarded the beast-fighting pit for so many years and had never seen such a scene. According to the previous years, such a large number of beast corpses would take about 10 days. But looking at the current situation, it would take less than 10 days. There was no need to wait for the sun to come out tomorrow. These beast corpses would be eliminated and only hard bones and thick scales would be left. The guard standing outside the pit had cold sweat on his back. He felt that his scalp was frozen. He shouted and ran to his companions to talk about what was happening in the beast-fighting pit. Insects? You mean those little beetles? It can't be, right? Some people doubted. It's true, it's true. If you don't believe me, go and see. The other guards were puzzled and planned to team up to see. They were really frightened by recent events. One or two of them did not dare to run around. However, when they went to see in a group, there were no more black beetles in the pit. Not a single one could be seen. However, the corpses of the beasts had obvious signs of being gnawed and shriveled. How come they're gone? They were just here. The guard walked around the pit, looking for them, but did not find any. Under the sand, a group of beetles that had just gnawed on the corpses of the beasts had left, following a big blue beetle and leaving the beast-fighting pit. The next day, when the sun rose, only a few seemingly harmless beetles were left in the beast-fighting pit. Most of them had disappeared. Chapter 334. The Snowfield King, who left the Beast City behind, took his people and rushed back to Snowfield City overnight. Standing in the secret underground palace, the Snowfield King's eyes widened as he looked at the small open space under his feet. Originally, the things that should have been placed here were gone. Staring at the palm-sized pit under his feet, the Snowfield King's bloodshot eyes looked like the angry flame bowl of Red Star City. The fists hanging on the side of his body were clenched. His whole body was full of terrible hostility, making the people behind the Snowfield King not dare to breathe. After a while, the Snowfield King gritted his teeth and said, "No matter who it is, no matter how many people are involved, I want them all to die." After leaving the underground palace, the Snowfield King issued a kill order. If you meet a tribesman, kill. Kill one and you'll be rewarded. Kill two and you'll be promoted. The more you kill, the more rewards you'll get. At the same time, the Snowfield King was still investigating who stole the treasure. He had always looked down on the tribesmen. Therefore, although his men said that there were traces of tribesmen's activities, he still thought that there must be other people involved, such as the people from the other two cities or other restless small cities. It was not only the Snowfield City that was brewing a storm that was about to unfold, but also Luoya City. Xiao Xian and the other two followed Su Gu back to Luoya City. Before entering the city, they found that the city's defense had been raised by a level. The whole place was filled with a solemn and uneasy atmosphere. After entering the city, this feeling was even more intense. Even the two royal sisters in the city, who were usually arrogant, stayed in their own residence. There were slaves guarding outside the house day and night. As soon as Luoya City's King Su Luan returned to the city, he called his 3 sons over and scolded them. The general meaning was, "Now is a special time. I don't care how you usually fight, but now you should settle down. Whoever dislikes having long arms and legs, I don't mind personally chopping them." Su Gu's 3 brothers did not doubt Su Luan's words. Su Luan really didn't care about the feelings between father and son. There were many beautiful women around him, and there were many lovers in other tribes. If he really wanted to have descendants, he would let them live again. Su Gu's 3 brothers were clear about this. Usually, they were muddle-headed, but now they had to stay awake. After Xiao Xian and the other 2 entered the city, they returned to the tribal area of Luoya City. In the past, even if other tribesmen went out, there would still be people in this place. But now, not a single person could be seen. The doors and windows were tightly shut, and there was no sound at all. Could it be that they went back early? Didn't you say that we would leave together after everyone came back? Ray was dissatisfied. He was very unhappy that those people had abandoned the three of them and left. No, even if the traveling team leaves, there will always be someone to stay behind. Tuo frowned as he looked at the situation in front of him, feeling more and more uneasy. Xiao Xian pointed at the empty area and asked the person next to him, "Where are they?" Next to him was Su Gu's slave. Although his heart was very repulsed by Xiao Xian and the other two, he still maintained a polite surface for Su Gu's sake. When he heard Xiao Xian's question, he replied, "They left the day before yesterday." His tone was contemptuous and angry, as if those people had done something unforgivable. Xiao Xian didn't care about the slave's tone. He opened the door and walked into their Yanjiao house. He found a piece of leaf with words by the window of the room, which was stuffed through the gap in the window. Looking at the handwriting, it was left by Huang Yi of the Mang tribe. There were 2 sentences written very briefly, meaning that the situation was urgent and they left first. If Xiao Xian and the other 2 came back, they should also leave quickly. They actually left first. Ray said angrily. Tuo was a lot calmer. He never expected other tribesmen to have the same attitude as his own tribe. Just as Xiao Xian looked at the leaf, Cha-Cha outside also called out, and then came over with a feather. This feather was inserted on the roof of the house where Xiao Xian and the others were. Cha-Cha could recognize the other party from the smell of this feather. Is this the feather of the Hui tribe's mountain eagle? Xiao Xian took the feather and found that there were also words left on the feather. The words above were, "Leave as soon as possible." The Mang tribe and the Hui tribe both left such words. No matter what happened, no matter what serious situation those people made, it was most important to leave immediately. The slave sent by Su Gu had been sent away by Xiao Xian, so now there were only 3 of them in the room. When they came in, Xiao Xian found that the people in the city were very wary of them. Near this house, he didn't know how many pairs of eyes were staring at them. The reason why they hadn't started yet was probably because of Su Gu. If they wanted to leave without permission, it would probably be difficult. There may be something big happening in this desert. It's not something we can get involved in. You leave first. Xiao Xian said to Lei and Tuo. What about you? Tuo asked. I will stay here for a few days. You go first and let Cha-Cha take you away. Xiao Xian said. This won't do. It's too dangerous for you to stay here alone. Lei and Tuo were unwilling. In the tribe, Xiao Xian was valued. They knew in their hearts that Xiao Xian was still an elder. How could they leave the elder here and let the 2 of them run away first? Xiao Xian did not immediately answer. He rolled up his sleeves and mobilized his totem power. The flame pattern extended from his shoulders, over his elbows, over his forearms, and then rushed over his wrists. Lei and Tuo's faces were sluggish. Their mouths opened twice before they said, Xian, you've improved? Tuo recalled, before the Colosseum, you've already improved, right? No wonder I felt that your momentum was different at that time. At that time, Tuo's attention was more on the giant beast. When he stared at Xiao Xian, he did not pay attention to Xiao Xian's momentum. At that time, Xiao Xian wore long sleeves that covered his wrists. They did not see the totem pattern on Xiao Xian's wrists. Even so, it's too dangerous for you. The other tribes followed several senior totem warriors and ran away. How can you stay here safely? Tuo and Lei were still not at ease. Su Gu sighed, I still need to help him. I'll leave you here so you can leave. Moreover, you're still injured. Xiao Xian said. Thinking of their current situation, Lei and Tuo were somewhat discouraged. Otherwise, we'll leave first and wait for you on the road. When we came here before, didn't we pass through a rocky area? We'll rest there and wait in that place. 10 days, Xiao Xian looked at Lei and Tuo. If you wait for 10 days and I still don't appear, then leave first. Tuo and Lei still wanted to say something, but were stopped by Xiao Xian. In addition, I also plan to go to Baisher City to take a look. Taking advantage of the chaos there, I'll find a chance to deal with the traitor Dao Yu. With such a threat, Xiao Xian did not dare to go back to the tribe with ease. He was familiar with the Wancher tribe. In this upcoming big storm, he did not know what role Dao Yu would play. Dao Yu must die. Although Lei and Tuo were very reluctant, they still did it according to Xiao Xian's arrangement. Xiao Xian went to find Su Gu. Su Gu did not pay much attention to Lei and Tuo. The 2 could not help him, so he readily let them go. He recently planned to enslave another group of people, as long as Xiao Xian stayed. After Lei and Tua were taken away by Cha-Cha, Su Gu went to find Xiao Xian. He wanted to enslave another group of slaves. After seeing Xiao Xian's enslavement fire, Su Gu also communicated with Xiao Xian. However, Xiao Xian had not yet enslaved people, and for the time being, he did not intend to enslave people. Su Gu was somewhat disappointed. He also wanted to see if Xiao Xian could successfully enslave people. This was a rare talent for the tribes. This person actually did not use it. Such a good talent, Su Gu thought. Xiao Xian did not tell Su Gu about his enslavement of the beetle. After assisting Su Gu to successfully enslave 20 people, he finally left. Su Gu was quite reluctant. I know that this time's matter actually has nothing to do with you Yanjiao people. However, I still want to remind you to be more careful. It is said that the Snowfield King has issued a kill order to the tribes, so that the people of Snowfield City, as long as they meet the tribes, will directly kill them. Isn't your Luoya city worried about the Snowfield King coming to kill you? You have taken in the tribes. Xiao Xian asked. Su Gu thought about his father's attitude. It seemed that he was not worried at all. Recently, his father's beautiful concubine had changed, and every day was very happy. Chapter 335. When Xiao Xian left Luoya City, the camel brought from the Rain tribe spontaneously followed Xiao Xian. Originally, Xiao Xian thought that the camel was reluctant to leave him, and knew that it was not good to stay in the city, so it wanted to follow him. However, after leaving Luoya City, Xiao Xian saw the camel shake its head and make an ong sound, as if it was saying bye-bye, and then went to other places. The direction was completely different from Xiao Xian, and it did not care about Xiao Xian at all. Xiao Xian stared at the camel's figure, quickly walked over, and untied its reins, leaving only a bag of water hanging around its neck. Xiao Xian had a water bottle and a stone that Yang Sui gave him, so he left the other bag of water to Mud. Patting Mud's neck, Xiao Xian said, "Good luck, don't get eaten." There were also some wild camels in the desert. Xiao Xian had seen them several times when he went into the desert with the expedition team. They were all in groups, walking on the ridge. In the scorching desert, the view was somewhat distorted. Mud, who seemed to be in a good mood, raised its head slightly and made an ong-ong sound. It faced the wind and sand and slowly walked away, the tuft of long hair on its head fluttering in the wind. Xiao Xian saw the camel's figure disappear from his sight and sighed. He looked at the reins in his hand and put them into the bag. He pulled his clothes, which were almost the same color as the desert, and quickly walked in the direction of Baishur City. The reason why Whitestone City was called Whitestone City was because the place where it was located, there were a lot of white stones exposed in the desert. In the desert, few rocks could withstand the continuous blow of flying sand and stones. The rocks exposed to the surface of the ground showed a variety of strange shapes under such grinding. When he saw the many white stones in his field of vision, Xiao Xian knew that he was not far from Baishur City. Perhaps there were still people from Baishur City patrolling around, so he had to be careful. Xiao Xian learned from Su Gu that after the death of the Baishur City's lord, the Baishur City's young lord brought people back to Baishur City and began to fight for the throne. Now there was a civil war. What was the cause of Baishur's death? Who killed him? Ironically, after his death, his children did not put in much effort to investigate the cause of his death or find the real culprit. They only cared about fighting for the position of city lord. While Xiao Xian was on his way to Whitestone City, inside a stone house, Blade Praying Mantis's ashen face looked like it had shrunk. Not a single part of its exposed skin was intact. Its face was covered with wrinkles and all kinds of muscle necrosis injuries. It looked a little scary, especially his left arm, which was wrapped in a thick cloth and emitted a very strong smell of herbs. His entire person looked extremely weak, as if he was suffering from a serious illness and was about to die. Wow! Daoyu once again spat out a mouthful of blood. Lying on the wooden bed covered with thick animal skin, he forced a smile as he looked at the person in front of him. Young lord. Seeing Daoyu struggling to get up, the Baishur City's young lord, who often looked for Daoyu to discuss things, hurriedly said, "No need to be so polite. Just lie down." His line of sight swept over Daoyu's terrifying face. Not daring to stay for half a minute, the Baishur young lord resisted the disgust in his heart and still maintained an amiable expression. His face was worried, as if he was worried about Daoyu's injury. That day, the Baishar king was killed. The white stone card that symbolized the king's identity was also lost. Dao Yu went to track the murderer. Although he did not find the murderer, he picked up the white stone card and handed it to the young lord. No one doubted that Dao Yu would kill the Baishar king. In their view, Dao Yu did not get any benefits from killing the Baishar king, nor did he have the ability. How powerful was the Baishar king? How could he be killed by a slave? Seeing Dao Yu chase the murderer and make himself look like a ghost, they knew that the murderer was not caught, but was poisoned. When he received the white stone card from Dao Yu, the young lord's heart was very happy. With this stone card, he would have more confidence in competing for the throne in the city. Looking at the weak person on the bed, if it was a normal day, the Baishar young lord would certainly not care much about him. First, Dao Yu's current appearance looked too scary. Moreover, Dao Yu now seemed to have been wasted. On the day he came back, he looked fine, but as the days passed, his condition became more and more serious. Fortunately, he hid it from others. Most people in Baishar city did not know about Dao Yu's condition. The Baishar king's 3 guards, one of them died, leaving only Dao Yu and another one. The 2 of them supported different young lords. Although he was only a slave, at his current level, he knew too many secrets and had too many subordinates. Before obtaining the throne, even the Baishar young lord had to think twice before making a move. Now, Baishar city was still divided. If the other party knew about Dao Yu's condition, they would certainly take the opportunity to make trouble. Therefore, the Baishar young lord concealed Dao Yu's condition. Dao Yu wanted to recuperate at home, so the Baishar young lord was happy to do so, as long as Dao Yu did not go out to meet people. Enduring a few words, the Baishar young lord really could not stand Dao Yu's festering face and the smell of medicine here. After learning what he wanted to know from Dao Yu's mouth, he hurriedly left on the pretext that he had something to deal with. When he left, the Baishar young lord was still thinking. As soon as he took the throne, he would execute this slave. After the Baishar young master left in a hurry, Dao Yu, who was lying weakly on the wooden bed, sneered and changed to a comfortable position on the animal skin. He then unwrapped the cloth that was wrapped around his hand. This arm had been covered with festering wounds. Many of the muscles were necrotic, and the festering places could even see the white bones, which was very scary. With some difficulty, he moved his hand. The sharp pain made Dao Yu tremble all over. However, Dao Yu did not care about this. Instead, his eyes showed expectation and irrepressible excitement. I didn't expect the core seed to be so powerful. Dao Yu's eyes were burning as he looked at the festering hand that was almost only left with the bones. Poison? That was a treasure that made the world crazy. So many people wanted to get it, but he, Dao Yu, got it. Just as he was thinking about the stolen treasure, Dao Yu suddenly heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Who? His fierce eyes swept over, only to see a person in a cloak. As soon as he saw this person, the expression on Dao Yu's face suddenly changed. The fierce look in his eyes also converged, and his festering face changed expression. If his face was intact, he could also see a respectful expression. Completely without the previous weak appearance, Dao Yu turned over from the bed and knelt on one knee, bowing his head in salute. "It looks like you've succeeded," the person in the cloak said faintly. This was a woman's voice. The sound was like the spring water flowing through, seeming to be cool. "Yes." Dao Yu slightly raised his head to look at the person in the cloak. His words were cautious. "That core seed. You take it yourself." The cloaked person did not care. "Thank you, young lord." Dao Yu's eyes burst with joy. "Shu also has a word for me to bring to you. If you can take down Baishar city will also belong to you." After a few simple words, the cloaked person left a bag of herbs and left silently. Dao Yu carefully held the bag of herbs and personally boiled it. He drank all of it, leaving no dregs behind. These would allow his injuries to heal faster. After drinking the medicine, he looked at the dark sky outside the window. Dao Yu called 2 people, whispered a few words, and then jumped out of the window. Chapter 336. Shao Xian was in the Baishar desert where Baishar city was located. He met 2 groups of people patrolling outside, but looking at their absent-minded appearance, he wanted to know the situation in Baishar city. Moreover, according to the information that Shao Xian learned, in the past, the patrols outside Baishar city were much stricter than they were now. The patrolling people would not be in such a listless state. However, it was also understandable. For the slaves, Baishar City was now a very critical time. The death of the big slave owner meant that their biggest master was gone. Who would take over? Who would become their next master? Everything was still uncertain. They were full of worries about the future development. Easily avoiding these absent-minded guards, Xiao Xian also paid attention to some creatures around, such as birds, small beasts, and so on. They could be another eye of the Baishar people. Who knew if there would be people enslaving insects in Baishar City? It was better to be careful. After arriving at a large rock, this rock looked like a mushroom with a large umbrella-like top. This was because during the sandstorm, large grains of sand scraped closer to the ground, slowly grinding away the parts of the rock that were close to the ground. That was why it looked like this. Hiding below, Xiao Xian temporarily did not have to worry about being discovered by the birds above. Near night, there were no people patrolling around. Going forward, he would soon reach Baishar City. Xiao Xian intended to take a rest first. Drinking some water to restore his physical strength, Xiao Xian thought about the plan to mix into Baishar City. As he was thinking, his brows wrinkled. He had been thinking about how to mix into Baishar City, but the premise was that Dao Yu was in Baishar City. But what if Dao Yu was not? What would he do in the city? Thinking about it, Xiao Xian cut a section of the reins from the camel. He intended to use this section of the rope to calculate the position of Dao Yu, but he did not know if it would be successful. After the divination was completed, Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked at the knot in his hand. He read the conclusion above and compared it to distinguish the position. His fingers drew on the ground and finally determined the indicated position. However, this direction was not the direction of Whitestone City. No matter what, Xiao Xian decided to go and take a look. Fortunately, he had done a divination before sneaking into Baishar City. Otherwise, it would have been a waste of time. After changing directions, Xiao Xian quickly headed in the direction indicated by the conclusion. Without Cha-Cha's help, Xiao Xian's speed in the desert slowed down, but it wasn't slow either. As they walked, Xiao Xian discovered that they were already out of the White Rock Desert. At such a critical time in Baishar City, Dao Yu was not in the city. What was he doing running so far away? Xiao Xian continued to move in that direction. He only rested for a short while during the night before continuing his search until he arrived at a certain place. This place looked no different from any other place in the desert. As far as the eye could see, there were sand dunes of varying heights. Even the relatively flat areas looked like the surface of a lake that had been disturbed by the wind. The wind here was slightly stronger, causing sand and dust to fly. Xiao Xian looked at the mountain-like sand dunes in front of him, and then looked around. He didn't see anything suspicious, but according to the conclusion, it should be around here. Did he have to continue moving forward? Not only because of the conclusion, Xiao Xian also had a very strange feeling. He always felt that there should be something here. Continuing to move forward, climbing up the mountain-like sand dunes, the strange feeling in his heart became even more intense. In Xiao Xian's mind, the shell wrapped in the fire flashed. Such a change made Xiao Xian stop. Just as Xiao Xian was puzzled, he suddenly heard a soft sound. Although it was the sound of the surrounding wind blowing the sand, after Xiao Xian's upgrade, his hearing had also increased. He could distinguish other sounds from those noises. It was obviously not the sound of sand blowing. Xiao Xian quickly lay down on the ground and pulled his hood up. He looked in the direction of the sound. The sound was very soft in the sand, like the sound of stones being moved. It was very careful, as if the person who made the sound was on guard against something. Xiao Xian lay there patiently and stared in the direction of the sound. The surrounding sand blew against Xiao Xian's body, quickly covering him in a layer. Soon, Xiao Xian discovered that between the two sand dunes in front of him, there was a crack in the ground, and the sand was sinking in. The gap grew wider and wider until it was wide enough for one person to pass through. Only then did Xiao Xian see a person quickly jump out from the gap. The person looked around cautiously, but didn't find anything. Only then did he wave downwards. Xiao Xian saw a person come out from the crack. It seemed that someone was helping to deliver the person underground. However, after the reckless person was handed out, the crack in the ground closed. The person who came out first looked around, then dragged the reckless person into the distance. Xiao Xian thought for a moment and walked along the ridge under the cover of the sand. Although he couldn't follow closely, he could at least see where the person went. The person walked a distance and went around to the back of a hill. Then, he dug a hole in the sand with his hands and pushed the person in. Before burying the person, He took off all the clothes of the person who was pushed into the hole and compared them with his own body. It seemed that he wanted to keep them for his own use. The man put away the clothes he had taken off and filled the hole with sand. He looked around before returning to where he had come from. Xiao Xian watched as the person returned to the place where he came out. He pushed away the sand that had covered the hole and knocked on the stone slab. After the stone slab was moved away, the person said something to the person below and went down through the crack. The stone slab closed again, and everything returned to normal. The wind quickly carried the sand and covered the place, making it impossible to see anything unusual. Xiao Xian remembered the place and came to the place where the person had just dug the hole to bury the person. He pushed away the sand and saw the buried person. Previously, the person was dragged face down, so Xiao Xian couldn't see his appearance. He could only see that it was a person. Now, Xiao Xian found that the person not only had a face, but also had many festering necrosis on his body. It looked very scary, and there were also traces of bleeding from his nostrils and other places. Xiao Xian couldn't see how the person's injuries were caused. There were no tattoos on his face. If there were no festering wounds, he should be a tall and muscular man. In the desert, even if he was a low-level slave, he was still a good laborer. What was under that place? Xiao Xian was very curious. If Dao Yu was here, what was his purpose? Xiao Xian lurked around, waiting for an opportunity. Around noon the next day, the desert weather was hot. Xiao Xian was still hiding behind the sand ridge. His body had been covered with a layer of sand. Not caring about the heat of the sand, Xiao Xian stared at the other side. He heard a little movement. Soon, the place opened again and another person came out. It was not the one Xiao Xian saw last night, but he did the same thing. After the other person came out, he also dragged the person to the distance, intending to dig a hole to bury the person. Xiao Xian's sudden appearance startled him. Before he could make a sound, he was grabbed by the throat and his two arms were removed. Xiao Xian looked at the slave lines that appeared and disappeared on his body and found that this person was a slave of Baishir. Chapter 337. Looking at the other person's frightened eyes, Xiao Xian whispered, "I'll ask you a few questions. Answer obediently." The other person nodded again and again. Xiao Xian loosened his grip on the other person's throat. Seeing the other person breathe a sigh of relief, he asked, "What is Dao Yu doing down there?" The other person suddenly looked up. Obviously, he did not expect Xiao Xian to directly mention Dao Yu's name. The fear in his eyes deepened. He was obviously very afraid of the name Dao Yu. Xiao Xian once again grabbed the other person's throat, as if to directly break it. The man nodded and shook his head, as if he had something to say, but could not make a sound. When Xiao Xian released him again, he coughed non-stop. "Speak. Here, die." The man's frightened eyes suddenly dissipated, leaving only a murderous look. He took a step back, twisted his body, and swept his leg like a whirlwind toward Xiao Xian. At the front of his leg, his toe was clamped with a sharpened bone. If it was cut, he did not know how much blood he would lose. However, Xiao Xian had long been prepared. He did not move forward, only his hand moved. A wooden thorn pierced the other person's neck. This was something Xiao Xian found in the desert. It was a kind of tree with hard thorns all over. The thorns also had a certain hardness. Xiao Xian also smeared poison on the thorns. The person who was stabbed would be like a deep drunk and then fall asleep. After the man fell, Xiao Xian added a knife and buried him. Then he came to the place where the man had just come out. Following the man's practice last night, he brushed aside the sand and buckled the slate there. The slate opened a gap, and the person inside looked outside, but did not see anyone. He doubtfully opened the slate a little more and stretched his head to look outside. As soon as he exposed his head, he felt a sudden pain in his neck, and his vision quickly blurred. After the man fell, Xiao Xian waited for a while. When he didn't hear any movement from below, he went down through the open crack and helped the unconscious man to sit down. He made a pose for him to look as if he had fallen asleep. Xiao Xian pulled the stone slab close and looked at the lock behind it. He also saw a polished stone stick next to it. Xiao Xian picked up the stone stick and stuck it there. This way, he could prevent people from outside from pulling the stone slab and coming in. After the stone slab was pulled up, the passage below was completely dark. There was a torch nearby, but Xiao Xian didn't need it. The passageway was nearly 2 meters high and less than 1 meter wide. Xiao Xian listened to the movements in the passageway and walked forward. The dark environment was not much of a problem for him. He just needed to change his field of vision. They walked until they reached a fork in the road, where there were 3 branching paths. Xiao Xian intuitively chose one. The deeper he went, the brighter the shell wrapped in totemic flames in Xiao Xian's mind. But at the same time, Xiao Xian also had a very uncomfortable feeling. Every nerve in his body was screaming for danger. This danger did not come from people, but from other reasons. The deeper he went, the wider the passageway became. There was wind flowing in the passageway, which proved that there should be other exits. This place didn't look like it had just been built. It looked like it had been built for a long time. Moving forward, Xiao Xian found that there were many warehouses here. There were people guarding the warehouses with a torch. 3 people were sitting on the ground next to the torch. However, looking at their slightly lowered chin, they were all dozing off. Xiao Xian sneaked into one of the warehouses. The 3 people guarding outside did not notice. The warehouse had no door to block it. There were many stones of different sizes inside, and the quality of the stones was not bad. They were at least mid-upper grade. Xiao Xian's first thought was that this was the place where Baishur City stored stones to make stoneware. But thinking about it, it didn't make sense. There was no need to hide the stones so far away. They hid it so well, as if they had other plans. At this moment, Xiao Xian heard a noise outside. He hid behind a few stones, and then observed the situation outside through the gaps of the stones. A group of people came in from outside, holding torches to illuminate the inside. "Hurry, hurry, hurry, move a few more," someone said. "Move more? There are already a lot of stones there. Swordmaster told us to move, so let's move quickly. He's watching over there." The sound of stones being moved came from one of the warehouses outside. Someone said in a low voice, "I heard that a few more died. Their bodies are all rotten." "Hiss. Do you think we'll become like them? But as long as we survive these few days, we'll be able to improve. This is what Swordmaster promised. He will tell young master." Those people moved the stones and gradually left. It was dark outside again. The 3 guards outside talked for a while. One of them went to urinate and left temporarily. This was the place where the stones were placed, so they didn't dare to scatter them here. Of the remaining 2 guards, one yawned and continued to sleep. His spirit was particularly bad recently, while the other looked at his companion who was sitting on the ground and dozing off. The skin on his face began to fester, and his heart became more and more afraid. He knew in his heart that his companion would not last long. Just when he was upset, he suddenly heard the sound of stones falling. Startled, he went over to look but didn't see anything. He returned to his original place and continued to think. Xiao Xian had come out of the warehouse and quickly left. The sound of the stones falling to the ground was made by him. Xiao Xian remembered the direction of the people who moved the stones and went directly there. The sense of danger was getting stronger and stronger, which may be related to the cause of those people. What was hidden here? Was the swordmaster in those people's words Dao Yu? Just as Xiao Xian continued to sneak in, Dao Yu looked at the small thing not far away, his eyes fanatical. Around Dao Yu, there were many large and small stones piled up. The stones were at least medium. This place was originally built by the Baishur city's former Baishur king to hide gems, and also as a cemetery after his death. In order to build such a palace-like cemetery, hundreds of slaves died. The remaining slaves were all killed after the underground palace was built. Therefore, very few people knew about this place. Only the Baishur king who took over could know about it. Others, even if they knew that there was such a place, did not know the exact location. Later, the dead former Baishur king opened this place again and threw his deceased ancestors' bones and coffin into the corner. He also turned this underground palace into a place to hide stones. Because he knew a secret that the 3 major cities had been hiding. He also thought that one day he could steal things from the 3 major cities. Unfortunately, before the former Baishur king could implement his ambitions, he was killed by a partnership. Probably, he never thought that the one who finally picked up the bargain would be the slave who followed him. There was more than one traitor. Of the 3 close guards, 2 betrayed, and the only loyal one had been killed. Dao Yu looked at the thing that was not much bigger than a fist. It was the core seed that the Baishur king had been thinking about. With the help of Shu, he stole it from the snowfield city when the tribesmen were causing trouble. Being allowed to leave the core seed, he was really ecstatic. The shiny weapons used by the 3 major cities, such as the armor and weapons used by the snowfield's young master that day, came from the core seed. The core seed could turn stones into ores, and then extract the needed things from these ores. These were all his in the future. This was Dao Yu's underground palace alone. Was he afraid of the Yanjiao tribe's revenge? At first, when he heard the news of the Yanjiao tribe, he was naturally worried. But with the enhancement of his strength, with more and more things in his hands, and knowing some secrets about the tribe's fire seed, he could not see the tribesmen. The slave owners would be the future overlords. And he, Dao Yu, would also try his best to become a slave owner. Thinking that Xiao Xian had such an ability, Dao Yu's mood suddenly became hazy, but soon became happy again. With Baisher City and the core seed, he did not have to be afraid. If he really could not solve the difficulties, he could still go to Shirshu. There was a cleansing in the desert. After this cleansing was over, there may be no 3 major cities. As for how many other cities could exist, Dao Yu did not know. However, Loya City may continue to exist, and the Baisher City that Dao Yu took over. No, it could not be called Baisher City in the future. It had to be changed. Dao Yu, who was fantasizing about a better future, did not know that the most unpleasant person was coming to his side. Chapter 338. Dao Yu piled up the stones around the core seed, leaving only a narrow aisle to go directly to the core seed. At this time, Dao Yu was standing in this aisle. The others did not quite understand the use of these stones, nor did they know what the one in the middle was. Only in Dao Yu's vague explanation, they knew that it was a dangerous thing. They did not recognize the value of the core seed, so they were not willing to approach it. Looking at the increasing number of stones piled up here, Dao Yu's face became more and more happy. Looking down at his palm, the original deep bone injury, after drinking the medicine, had been a lot better. His own recovery ability was also strong. The skin and flesh of the injury had regenerated. After 2 days, it would grow well. If it was another 5 or 6 days, it would certainly be completely healed. Well, this is it for the time being, Dao Yu said to the people who carried the stones. At first, there were 50 slaves sent here by Dao Yu, but after a few days, there were only 30 people left. Especially in these 2 days, there were a lot of deaths. Hearing Dao Yu's words, the other people's hearts relaxed. The work here was finally done. The task was completed, and they were waiting for the reward. Dao Yu called the people in the underground palace to come here and took out a pottery jar. After opening it, they could smell a burst of wine. For the slightly lower-level slaves, wine was a luxury and could not be tasted often. For the lower levels, they may not be able to taste it in their lifetime. After smelling the wine, some people swallowed hard, their eyes staring straight at the jar in Dao Yu's hand, envious. It was said that only high-level slaves and slave owners could often drink it. Regardless of whether it was good or not, this was at least a symbol of identity. Looking at it made people's hearts itch unbearably. Dao Yu took in the other people's expressions and smiled. Well, are you all here? Should be. Someone said somewhat impatiently. Dao Yu looked at the people who had gathered, counted them, and asked what happened to the missing people. He knew who had been dragged out, but after counting, there were still 2 people missing. One was the person who dragged the body out and did not come back, and the other was the guard at the exit. Would you like me to go over there and look? Someone said. Dao Yu thought for a moment and shook his head. Forget it. Don't worry about them. Let's drink first. It's been hard on everyone these days. I specially asked for a jar of wine from the young master for everyone to drink. Hearing Dao Yu's words, the other people's hearts were also happy. Although they were very afraid of Dao Yu and even called him Blade Master. Now that they heard Dao Yu's words, they couldn't help but feel relieved. The fear of the past few days also dissipated a lot. As for the 2 who didn't come, none of them wanted to leave. If they didn't get any benefits after leaving, it would be a huge loss. Dao Yu lifted the wine jar and took a sip himself. After drinking, he smacked his lips as if he was savoring the aftertaste, making the others envious. After taking the first sip, Dao Yu immediately handed the jar to the people next to him. Everyone have a sip. There were not so many cups here. For the slaves, there was not so much attention. Usually, everyone shared the food like this. Therefore, after Dao Yu handed out the wine jar, the people who took it directly took the jar and poured it. The others could not wait to come and grab it. The slave who took the wine had just taken a sip, but before he could taste it carefully, the wine jar was taken away. If it weren't for Dao Yu standing here, these people might really fight over this jar of wine. Dao Yu looked at the slaves who were grabbing the wine jar, while making a sound to stop them from robbing, ensuring that everyone drank at least a sip. No one noticed that Dao Yu's eyes flashed fiercely and viciously. Snap! The wine jar that had been drunk was smashed to the ground. The slave holding the jar covered his throat, making a sound. Blood flowed from his mouth, and his legs seemed to not listen to him. Soft, he staggered a few steps and fell to the ground. One by one, the slaves fell down. Some people reacted to the wine they had just drunk, but it was already too late. Dao Yu quietly stood next to them, watching them fall down one by one. His breathing stopped. A slave who was vomiting blood crawled toward Dao Yu, his eyes full of unwillingness. It seemed that he wanted to drag Dao Yu to hell together. Unfortunately, his arm had not yet touched Dao Yu's foot when it powerlessly hung down, no longer making a sound. Dao Yu contemptuously laughed and kicked. Seeing that the person did not respond, he should have already stopped breathing. However, he was not at ease. The poisoned people fell to the ground one by one in the chest, crushing their sternum. After determining that there was no possibility of survival, he went to the exit. There should be a guard who had not come over, and it seemed that there was also a slave. In short, they all had to die. He would not let go of anyone who knew the secret here. Even the birds that he rode from Baishar City stopped in one place. After sending the birds back, he walked over on foot and did not let the birds follow him. Before, Dao Yu had selected these slaves and sent them over, but only to repair the underground palace and carry the stones. Dao Yu himself did not want to risk his life to be in close contact with the core seed every day. He would die. When he stole the core seed, one of his arms was almost wasted. Naturally, he did not want to try a second time. Since he did not want to die, then let others die. Now that these projects had been initially completed, there was no need for those slaves to survive. If there was a need in the future, he could send a group of people over. There were many slaves in the desert, especially now in this chaotic time. Dao Yu did not care about the life and death of these slaves. Although Dao Yu himself was a slave, he did not look at the other slaves. When Dao Yu went to the exit, Xiao Xian came out from the dark and looked at the 30 people on the ground who had no breath. He thought, Dao Yu is really ruthless enough. Looking away from the people on the ground, Xiao Xian walked over to the core seed. There were some glowing crystals around, but there was no flame. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Xiao Xian always felt that the crystals here were much brighter than in other places. Even if it was the same kind of glowing crystal, the one placed here was better. Feeling the danger signals from every cell in his body, Xiao Xian looked at the small metal object in the middle of the pile of stones. Dao Yu was hiding it like this, so it must be a very special thing. Xiao Xian's heart moved. Was it related to the metal? The closer he got, the more Xiao Xian could feel the burning tingling in his arms, face, and other places. No, not every part of his body could feel the pain. Xiao Xian took off his outer layer of clothing, revealing the wormskin clothing he was wearing. It was the skin of the big worm that he had picked up when he went to Eagle Mountain with Cha-Cha. At this time, there was no pain in the places covered by this worm skin. Thinking of something, Xiao Xian quickly took off the worm skin he was wearing. No matter what, he would take this thing and not leave it to Dao Yu. Quickly rushing over, Xiao Xian wrapped the small metallic object with his insect skin coat. He wrapped it around a few times so not a single seam was exposed. Sure enough, the tingling feeling quickly disappeared. After wrapping it, Xiao Xian put the thing in the animal skin bag and hid it close to his body. Since the worm skin had been well isolated from this crisis, there was no danger in keeping it close. After hiding it, Xiao Xian jumped lightly and turned over to hide behind a big stone. A few seconds after Xiao Xian hid, Dao Yu rushed over like the wind. When he arrived at the exit, he wanted to kill the sleeping slave. However, he found that there was something wrong with the man. Taking a closer look, Dao Yu's heart was even more suspicious. The slave didn't seem to be too tired and fell asleep. It was more like a trick. Moreover, Dao Yu also felt the disappearance of the core seed. Within the range of this underground palace, the threat of the core seed could naturally be felt. When this threat suddenly disappeared, it must be that something had happened to the core seed. After killing the slave, Dao Yu rushed back to take a look. Sure enough, the place where the core seed was originally placed was empty, and there was no shadow around. Dao Yu glared, incredulously looking at the empty place. The blue veins on his forehead violently jumped, his eyes red, and he issued an angry roar. Under the rage, Dao Yu did not care about anything else. Venting his anger, he slapped a stone pillar that supported the underground palace. The place where he hit suddenly appeared with a clear palm print. At the same time, the pillar body also cracked with a clear crack. The whole underground palace shook, and stone chips and dust constantly fell from the top. Chapter 339. Dao Yu was trembling with anger, his whole body twitching slightly. One was the pain. After all, his injuries had not been completely healed. However, the most important thing was the anger that was rising in his body. Compared to the anger of losing the core seed, the pain was naturally not a big deal. There was no one else here, only Xiao Xian and Dao Yu. The more Dao Yu was like this, the more Xiao Xian was convinced of the preciousness of the thing that he had just obtained. He was determined to keep it well, to give it to anyone but Dao Yu. Xiao Xian could hear Dao Yu's rough breathing, like a raging flame bull. Just as Xiao Xian was about to go out and clean up the house, he felt a change. There seemed to be some invisible energy rioting around, and it was Dao Yu who was standing there. This kind of rioting power made Xiao Xian feel very bad. Looking through the gap between the stones, Xiao Xian saw Dao Yu's appearance at this time. Dao Yu's coat had been broken, and he could see countless fine lines from his head to his torso and arms, just like his meridians. These fine lines still extended, covering Dao Yu's body. Not only that, but these fine lines were also like his meridians, sometimes thick and sometimes thin. Dao Yu felt that such a change was a good thing. He could feel the power flowing in his meridians, his body was strengthening, and changing in a good direction. Only at this moment, Dao Yu did not have too much thought to feel such a change. He was still in the rage of losing the core seed, and the anger made his thinking not so clear. For a moment, he did not think deeply about the results and significance of such a change. What surprised Xiao Xian was that there was a chain-like pattern on Dao Yu's neck, which was the slave pattern of Baishir City. After unlocking the high-level slaves, the slave pattern on their body would also change, not as much as the low-level slaves. At this moment, Xiao Xian felt that the chain on Dao Yu's neck seemed to be tightened, and the bulging muscles made Dao Yu's whole person look like he had swelled up a circle. Dao Yu's change continued, and the airflow around his body was surging wildly. With a roar, the chains were tightened and tightened again. Almost all the bones in Dao Yu's body, such as his sternum, spine, limbs, knees, elbows, and so on, were making a ringing sound, like a rattlesnake shaking its tail. On the other hand, Dao Yu's seriously injured arm was rapidly recovering, as if reborn. His heart became even stronger, and the blood in the meridians in his neck flowed rapidly. His muscles seemed to expand in rhythm with his heartbeat, protruding outwards. Suddenly, Xiao Xian heard a bang sound, as if a chain had been broken. At the same time, the chain pattern on Dao Yu's neck was really broken, and like melting, it gradually dissipated and disappeared. The corners of Xiao Xian's eyes twitched, and he couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. He once asked Su Gu, could the enslaved slaves break free from that kind of shackles? Su Gu said that it was possible, but the probability was very low. To be able to do it to that extent, one must be a genius character. Not only was his talent extremely high, but there was also a certain amount of luck. That was not something that anyone could do, not even 1 in 10,000. Now, there was such a person in front of Xiao Xian, and he did it. In Xiao Xian's mind, there was a fire that did not belong to the slaves. It was not the totem flame of Yanjiao, nor was it the dual-colored flame of the slave owners. In any case, this was an independent flame, out of the scope of the slaves. This was the reflection of Dao Yu's source of power at this time. At this moment, Dao Yu was like a glaring Azura, with the power of a demon. The power fluctuations that broke out made Xiao Xian's face become unusually dignified. Boom! Dao Yu punched the side of the stone pillar, his eyes with a destructive madness, as if he had lost his mind. The underground palace shook even more, and the stones fell with the dust. It couldn't go on like this. Xiao Xian instantly mobilized the power of the totem to the peak. The totem flame in his mind violently rolled, and his blood seemed to boil with the appearance of the totem pattern. His whole body's momentum was like a surging river, resolutely moving forward. It seemed that even if he was facing a thick wall, he would break it hard. Compared to Dao Yu, who had just broken through the shackles, it was not weak. So what if Dao Yu broke through the shackles? He would still kill him. Almost at the moment when Xiao Xian rushed out, Dao Yu's madness shifted the target. From the side of the stone pillar, he moved to Xiao Xian's body, his eyes locked on Xiao Xian's body. At this moment, in Dao Yu's vision, the surrounding stones, corpses, and even the whole underground palace had all retreated. As far as his line of sight, there was only Xiao Xian left, the person who stole the core seed and broke his dream. Seeing Xiao Xian rushing over, Dao Yu did not avoid it. His body flashed, directly facing Xiao Xian. When he jumped up, the stone slab under his feet could not withstand the sudden impact. It cracked into pieces of different sizes, and the stone chips rose like a mist. The dense fist shadows intertwined, and the air seemed to be compressed by a heavy hammer. The shock ripples visible to the naked eye spread out layer by layer, shaking off the stone chips and dust that fell from the top. In a face-to-face encounter, it was unknown how many times they had fought. Waiting for him to fall from the air, Xiao Xian rushed up, rushing straight to Dao Yu. The surrounding airflow seemed to be driven by Xiao Xian, pressing toward Dao Yu. The fist had yet to arrive, but the oppressive air, which was like an army passing through, had already rolled over, clearly showing the power contained in it. In the face of Xiao Xian's attack, Dao Yu, with absolute confidence, did not avoid it. His ankle once again suddenly rotated to meet the attack, and the ground cracked into pieces of stone slabs shattered. In Dao Yu's mind, as long as he broke through the shackles, he would reach a height that others could hardly reach. It was just a tribal kid. Even if this person had been promoted, it was still not as powerful as his own breakthrough. After he became a senior slave, he had also killed tribesmen. In his opinion, although the tribesmen had some strange abilities, they were nothing special. Especially after he learned about the secret of the tribe's fire seed, he looked down on them even more. Kill. He wanted to kill the person who stole the core seed. In the air, there was a series of roaring sounds like rolling thunder, like the beating of war drums. Every blow contained the determination to kill. If ordinary people were in the face of such an offensive, they would definitely be blown into slag. In this underground palace under the desert, only the roaring sound was left. Other sounds seemed extremely weak in such a roaring sound. The broken stone slabs were getting smaller and smaller, and the stone chips and dust that were shaken up were like smoke all around. Xiao Xian felt as if he had returned to the original mountain forest full of mystery and crisis, the situation of the battle with the ferocious beasts. In the face of the ferocious beasts, a slight negligence and a weak momentum could cause an irreparable situation. At this moment, it was the same. What's more, it was facing a traitor of the tribe like Dao Yu. Can't retreat, can't be weak. If the other party's attack was strong, he would be stronger. If the other party was fierce, he would be fiercer. If the other party wanted to fight, he would fight even harder. Xiao Xian's totem patterns began to brighten, like a flame cast. Just like when he exposed the blue flame in the Colosseum, it seemed to burn people. Boom. Dao Yu suffered a heavy punch. After the punch hit, Xiao Xian did not stop. Followed by a fist shadow that could not be seen by the naked eye, it once again bombarded Dao Yu's chest. Dao Yu, who had been punched twice in succession, was in a sorry state. He flipped upside down in the air and fell heavily to the ground, continuing to slide back for a while before stopping. Xiao Xian wanted to continue a few more times, only to find that on Dao Yu's body, those vein-like patterns, the skin seemed to be cracked and blood oozed out from inside. Dao Yu, who fell to the ground, tilted his head to look at Xiao Xian's direction. His mouth kept spurting blood, his whole body twitching. At this time, it was not anger, but an uncontrollable reaction. The two punches just now were like a signal, like a pair of hands pushing a long domino. With a crash, the domino chain fell down. Dao Yu's sharp and unstoppable aura had declined to a terrible degree. Blood splashed out from the veins on Dao Yu's face. Because of the pain, his expression was distorted, looking more and more ferocious. His eyes were full of disbelief. Breaking through the shackles, he actually lost? If he was given 2 more days, no, as long as 1 day was enough, he would stabilize the power in his body and prepare well. He would definitely be able to beat this kid. He couldn't let this kid steal the core seed. It was his own, Dao Yu's alone. He also wanted to build his own desert city, become a slave owner, and become an overlord. How could he die like this? Not reconciled. He was not reconciled. Lose to anyone, but not to this kid. No. Dao Yu's eyes were wide open, staring at Xiao Xian who was coming towards him. The stone chips and dust had fallen. His vision, which should have been clearer, had become blurred. He felt that the power of his whole body was sharply reduced. The powerful and surging feeling of breaking through the shackles seemed to be an illusion. The tide rose, and then the tide receded. Finally, in his blurred vision, the figure that was getting closer and closer seemed to turn into a fire. There seemed to be a pattern in the flame, a double-horned pattern that he had long forgotten. Xiao Xian looked at Dao Yu, who had lost his breath of life. His heart was puzzled. His 2 punches, although he used a lot of strength, if Dao Yu's ability to break through the shackles, with that kind of physical strength, should not be so easy to die. The final performance was more like a violent backlash. Xiao Xian put his finger on Dao Yu's pulse and pressed it. It had indeed stopped beating. Unlike the strong appearance, Dao Yu's body seemed to be in a mess and seriously damaged. Was it because of the core seed? No, it was not necessarily because of the core seed. Xiao Xian was thinking when suddenly, the whole underground palace shook. A large number of stones fell from the top, and sand seeped down from the cracks above. Boom! Another one. It was like someone was deliberately slapping above. The seeping sand expanded like a waterfall, and large chunks of boulders began to fall. The illuminating crystal stone was a lot dimmer after the core seed was wrapped up. Now it was covered with sand and dust. It was even darker. Damn, who was up there in the end? Now was not the time to think about other things. Xiao Xian hurriedly returned in the direction he came from. The torches inserted in the underground palace had long been extinguished, and the underground palace was dark. Fortunately, Xiao Xian changed his vision and could still see the road. After Xiao Xian ran away, the place where he had fought with Dao Yu made a roar and began to collapse. This underground palace, which had cost hundreds of slaves' lives and now dozens of lives, was about to become a thing of the past. Chapter 340. Xiao Xian ran out along the underground passage. The underground palace behind him was quickly collapsing, and the sound of falling stones was incessant. The place of collapse was getting closer and closer. Xiao Xian pulled open the stone slab and drilled out. Suddenly sensing something, he tilted his head to the side. An arrow shot from behind, almost brushing past Xiao Xian's hair. His longer hair was cut off by the tip of the arrow, and his ears and the side of his face were in pain from the strong wind brought by the arrow. Bang! The arrow shot into the sand not far from Xiao Xian. The sand on the sand exploded, and a sand-colored flower bloomed. Without even looking back, Xiao Xian propped himself up and flipped over. The sharp whistle-like sound rang out again. The arrow tore through the air, instantly traversing a distance of tens of meters, and shot into the place where Xiao Xian had been. The sharp arrow with a cold light almost brushed past Xiao Xian's waist and nailed into the sand, blowing up a nearly 1-meter deep sand pit. He didn't even have time to catch his breath. The moment he landed, another arrow came right at him. Xiao Xian jumped up, turned around, and pulled out his sword. With a clang, he pushed away the arrow. Instead of retreating, he dodged and rushed towards the direction of the arrow. At this moment, Xiao Xian focused all his energy on the archer. It was a person wearing a cloak. Her face was covered with a cloth, and her appearance couldn't be seen clearly. Her long hair was blown by the wind, and probably because of the long desert trek, it had lost its former softness and looked a lot more messy. The dust-stained cloth fluttered in the wind, and he could vaguely see a curvaceous figure. Under the cloak, there was some low-key metal armor that didn't shine as brightly. It was a woman, and her status wasn't low. To be able to wear metal armor, she was most likely a slave owner from the 3 major cities. The archer's eyes were fixed on Xiao Xian. Although Xiao Xian was still more than 50 meters away from the archer, he could still feel the archer's cold gaze, just like the murderous and chilling arrowhead pointing at Xiao Xian. The other party held a strong bow, similar to the one Xiao Xian had seen in Dao Ji's hands. He could feel the power of such a bow from the few arrows he had just fired. The difference was that the arrow shot by the other side was more threatening than the one shot by Dao Yu. Whoosh! Another one. With the vibration of the bowstring, the arrow spun at high speed in the air, creating a sharp whistling sound as it rubbed against the air. Like a meteor, it shot towards Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian quickly avoided the arrows that were shot. A sand lotus bloomed on the ground, and each time the place where it exploded was very close to Xiao Xian. Ignoring the sand that exploded and splattered in all directions, Xiao Xian locked onto the archer, including her every tiny movement and every look. He judged where the other party would shoot in the next moment, and then made a judgment to avoid the threat of the arrow. At this moment, Xiao Xian's pupils were filled with the archer's shadow and the arrow's shadow. Seeing that Xiao Xian was getting closer and closer, the other party didn't have many arrows in her hand. She directly threw the bow aside and pulled out a nearly 4-finger-wide double-edged sword. With a flick of her wrist, she drew a beautiful arc to meet Xiao Xian. The blade of the sword brushed against the blade, splashing a series of sparks. The sword that stabbed towards Xiao Xian's chest was pushed away by a strong and fierce force. Buzz! The sound of metal vibrating was accompanied by a chill that made one's scalp feel like it was going to explode. Bang! The ground trembled, and the two people separated. Xiao Xian hurriedly retreated 10 steps. A giant beast ran in front of Xiao Xian. Every step it took seemed to cause the ground to tremble, and its thick hooves stepped on the ground, splashing countless sand. It was this giant beast that had just stepped on the surface of the underground palace, and it had trampled hard. This heavyweight giant beast stood up and then stomped down hard. The curtain of sand that had been raised was forcefully split by the biting cold blade. Xiao Xian glanced to the side. At this time, the place where the underground palace was located had collapsed by more than half. Looking over there was a very obvious huge pit. Xiao Xian looked at the person and the beast not far away. He had never seen this giant beast in Beast City, but he could see that it had been enslaved. The person who had enslaved it was the woman in the cloak next to it. The other party's sword reflected a very dazzling light under the scorching sun, but at this moment, it was no longer attacking. Instead, it stood there quietly. The other party was standing on a sand dune, and Xiao Xian was standing at a lower position. Therefore, when the other party looked at Xiao Xian, it was looking down. The giant beast in front of Xiao Xian was swinging its thick hooves, as if waiting for its master's order to start trampling again. However, its goal was no longer the underground palace, but Xiao Xian, the little guy. Xiao Xian raised his eyebrows. He heard the sound of approaching quickly, and it was still behind him. Jiela Jiela. Jiela Jiela. Behind the dune, a huge snake head emerged. The snake turned over the sand dune and came towards Xiao Xian, but it did not get close. It stopped nearly 50 meters away from Xiao Xian. It was this giant snake that was shaking its tail that was making a rattling sound. However, Xiao Xian's main attention was not the huge rattlesnake that suddenly appeared, but the person standing on the snake's head. Shirshu? Xiao Xian did not expect to meet Shirshu here. We meet again. Shirshu's tone sounded like a friend that he had not seen for a long time. If it were not for the current situation, it would be easy to be regarded as a friend. The visitor was not good. This was what Xiao Xian thought at the moment. Why are you here? Xiao Xian asked. For a slave. Shirshu seemed to mention it casually, very casually. Dao Yu. Xiao Xian's heart moved. Dao Yu is one of your people? Not exactly. He's dead. Xiao Xian said. It's better if he's dead. I'm going to die. Shirshu seemed to be more inclined to a dead Dao Yu. The dead are more obedient. After that, Shirshu turned his head and said in a chatty tone, however, since we meet here, you might as well come with us. What if I don't go? Xiao Xian looked at Shirshu, paying attention to the cloaked person on the other side to prevent a sudden attack. You refuse? When Shirshu said these 3 words, although it was a question, it carried a hint of irrefutable meaning. Indeed, now Xiao Xian was surrounded by enemies, 2 slave owners and 2 giant beasts. The situation was indeed very bad. Xiao Xian did not make a sound, and the other 2 did not speak, waiting for Xiao Xian's reply. Suddenly, Xiao Xian smiled, breaking the deadlocked atmosphere at the moment. I refuse. Shirshu was about to speak when his eyes focused, looking at a place. At Xiao Xian's feet, a blue creature drilled out from under the sand. It was a beetle. Then there was a rustling sound, a black beetle drilled out of the ground, as if to report, rushing out. The yellow sand was quickly occupied by black beetles. Not only around Xiao Xian, but further away, including behind Shirshu and the cloaked person, there were black beetles like a black wave surging. Chapter 341. This situation was completely beyond Shirshu's expectations. Looking at his expression, he knew that he had always felt that victory was in his grasp and that everything was under control. But what he saw at this moment shocked him. It was also the first time he had encountered such a situation. Over there, don't look at Xiao Xian's calm face, hanging an unfathomable expression, but in his heart, he was roaring. Fuck! He did not expect that a bug that he had enslaved to practice the method of enslavement would become such a situation. When he was in the Beast City, Xiao Xian found that the beetle had summoned a lot of younger brothers, and now it had directly turned into an army of bugs. The two behemoths at this moment also did not have the prestige they had before. The huge rattlesnake swung its tail and shook off all the bugs climbing up the snake's tail. However, more and more bugs crawled out of the sand, and they did not seem to know how to be afraid. They let the snake's tail shake again and again. Originally, the color of the sand could be seen from some gaps, but it was not long before the ground was black, and the bright carapaces reflected the light. The person in the cloak looked at the beetles that were gathering around her. Even if she was brave and thought that she was strong, she could not stay calm at this moment. She suddenly felt a sense of fear. She kicked away the beetles that were gathering around her and used her knife to sweep away the beetles that were blocking the way in front of her. Then, she jumped onto the back of the giant beast. After she jumped on the behemoth, the place where she had passed before, which had been cleared out of a narrow aisle, was covered by a wave of black bugs in the blink of an eye. The behemoth that stomped its hooves and shook the underground palace. At this moment, no matter how much it stomped its feet, it was useless. These bugs that crawled out of the ground did not know how to be afraid. Shershu looked at the black wave of beetles and thought of something. He took out the dried meat from a bag that he carried with him. It was a long journey, so naturally, the food was well prepared. Unlike the slightly rough dried meat eaten by Xiao Xian and others, the dried meat brought by Shershu was thinner, as if it had been pressed and then rolled into a roll. Shershu unrolled the roll of meat a little, tore off a piece of meat half the size of a palm, and threw it out. The piece of meat fell about 20 meters away from the snake. The previously calm wave of insects instantly surged. Wherever the meat landed, the surrounding insects surged up. That place was like a wave that rose out of thin air, instantly rising higher. Shershu, who had been staring at the other side, couldn't help but twitch his eyelids. What he was worried about was that if the beetle army was just a facade, they wouldn't have to worry too much. He had seen these beetles when he was in Rock Hill City. They were all active in the filthy places of the animal pens. However, the reality in front of him had completely shattered his hopes of being lucky. These bugs really ate meat. Shershu had no doubt that if a bound giant beast was placed here and encountered such a beetle army, it would be tantamount to a death warrant thrown out by the Grim Reaper. The outcome would certainly be the same as that piece of meat just now. Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. Obviously, such a small piece of meat did not satisfy the beetle army at all. Instead, it made the beetles even more anxious and ferocious. As if waiting for the order to attack, more and more beetles surrounded the two giant beasts, like hungry ghosts smelling the smell of food, greedily looking at the food in front of them. If they could speak, they would probably shout at this time. The enemy is difficult to deal with. Wait for the boss's order. Brothers together. The hand of the person in the cloak holding the knife trembled a little. When walking in the desert, many people were afraid of encountering the dangerous desert beasts. But for her, the bigger threat was the small desert creatures, and they were in large groups. Even if she was knowledgeable, she had never encountered such a swarm of insects. Talking to them about feelings, reasoning, and conditions? What a joke. It was useless to talk. These insects did not have that high of intelligence to understand. The only thing she could do was to talk to the commander of these insects. The person in the cloak looked at Shershu, moved her gaze to Xiao Xian, and finally stared at the blue beetle at Xiao Xian's feet. If she hadn't dropped the bow and arrow just now, if she could have killed the big blue beetle, how would the situation have changed? Almost at the moment she had the intention to kill, Xiao Xian looked over there. Meeting Xiao Xian's eyes, the person in the cloak felt a chill in her heart. She glanced at Shershu and saw Shershu shake his head, so she temporarily suppressed the thoughts in her heart. This person's perception was too keen. If he didn't succeed in one move, and this brat fought with all his might, then both sides might suffer. She didn't want to risk her life here. The movement over at the Colosseum, was it you who caused it? Shershu asked in a deep voice. That day, many people saw this kind of black beetle appear in the place where the battle beasts were locked up, but not many people thought deeper. After all, in the eyes of most people, this kind of beetle was too small and harmless, so no one cared. Xiao Xian did not refute, nor did he admit it. He just sneered. You say it as if you are innocent. The war in the desert was caused by you, right? You sent people to kill the Baishur city lord, right? Shershu just smiled, neither denying nor admitting it. Forget it. That's it for today. I didn't expect you to have such ability. However, if you have something to look for me, you can go to Rock Tomb City. Shu said as he threw a golden metal plate to Xiao Xian with the logo of Rock Tomb City on it. Originally, he intended to use force, but things were beyond his expectations. Shu changed his mind. He always liked to choose in a more favorable direction. Xiao Xian caught the plate that was thrown. I think that if I don't have anything to look for you, I will go back to the tribe after leaving. I will not be involved in the war in the desert. Shu was non-committal. Instead, he asked, do you know why Dao Yu chose to become a slave, and why he looked down on the tribes? Xiao Xian only said, I only know that Dao Yu is a traitor to the tribe and must be killed. But he didn't answer more, waiting for Shu's next words. Shu didn't care. He appeased the giant snake that had begun to become restless because of the swarm and said, because the slave owners will get stronger and stronger, and the tribe will eventually perish. Xiao Xian put on a look of disbelief. Nonsense. If it were other tribes at this moment, they would probably be furious, right? I'm not lying about this. If you don't believe me, you can pay more attention to see if the tribes are getting weaker and weaker. Are there problems with some of their abilities? Hearing this, Xiao Xian's first thought was the Rain tribe. Yang Sui said that once their Rain tribe's shaman could ask for rain, but later this ability slowly disappeared. Seeing Xiao Xian's expression, Shu's smile deepened. He continued, in fact, some people have already noticed it, but they just didn't dare to say it. Xiao Xian didn't say anything. Shu decided to put another bomb. You tribes are actually very stupid. You clearly found the facts, but you are unwilling to admit it. Stubborn, conservative, stupid. You don't know that the longer it takes, the more disadvantageous it is for them, and the closer they are to extinction. The only smart one is the Yanjiao tribe, but it is only half smart. The other half will still continue to go to destruction. Xiao Xian's pupils shrank as he stared at Shu. Did Shu's half-smart refer to the divided Yanjiao tribe? If so, he didn't think that Shu's half-smart referred to the current Yanjiao people. Then there was only one possibility left. The other half of the Yanjiao tribe that had been separated 1,000 years ago and had no news. Chapter 342. Xiao Xian still wanted to ask more, but Shu was not willing to say more. You go, we still have things to do here. Moreover, our people are almost here. When the time comes, even if you use these insects, you won't be able to fight. Of course, if you want to know more, you can go to Rock Tomb City to find me. Xiao Xian quickly judged the situation and decided to withdraw first. Let's go, Xiao Xian said from the big beetle at his feet. The blue beetle immediately opened the way, and where it passed, the insects spontaneously separated. Seeing this situation, Shu's eyes flashed thoughtfully. When Xiao Xian left the underground palace, he could not see Shu. Xiao Xian let Sapphire take its insects to forage for food, while he himself rushed to the place where he had agreed with Lei and Tuo. As for Shu's words, Xiao Xian did not fully believe it, but he knew that it should be 3 parts true. After Xiao Xian left, the man in the cloak asked Shu with concern, Are you not afraid that he will tell our things to the slave owners in other cities? He won't, Shu said. If Xiao Xian was smart enough and decided to not get involved, he certainly would not reveal more to others. Even if it was revealed, it didn't matter. At that time, the general trend was set. What if he participates? The cloaked man was still not at ease. If he participates, cooperating with such a person may not be a bad thing. While talking in the collapsed underground palace, a lizard with thick scales crawled out. It was not too big, but it was very flexible. It came to Shu, opened its mouth, and spat out what it had swallowed. A dead man covered in lizard gastric juices appeared on the sand. It was the dead Dao Yu. Unlike the appearance when he died, Dao Yu at the moment seemed to have lost a lot of blood. Because of the wounds on his body, it was completely impossible to see his original appearance. Fortunately, although he was swallowed into the lizard's stomach, it was basically not digested. The flesh and bones were still there, but it looked shrunken. The man in the cloak saw Dao Yu's current appearance and asked Shu with some disgust, Brother, he has become like this. Can he still be used? Of course. Shu looked at Dao Yu's current appearance with satisfaction. When you're alive, you're not obedient. Then you can only use death. At the moment when Dao Yu broke through the shackles, he was actually not far from death. It was just that Xiao Xian's appearance had brought forward his death. The person in the cloak was originally monitoring Dao Yu. At that time, she was actually inside the underground palace, close to another exit, as far away as possible from the core seed. As for the giant beast that was following her, it buried its body in a sand dune somewhere outside. When Dao Yu and Xiao Xian fought, she wanted to help. However, she noticed that Dao Yu had broken through the shackles and did not go up to help. Instead, she ran out and summoned the giant beast to trample the underground palace. He wanted to kill Xiao Xian and then take away Dao Yu's body. Unexpectedly, Xiao Xian was too strong, and there were also those insects. I can't sense the core seed here. The cloaked man frowned. The core seed must have been taken away by that kid. Shu said. Impossible. I didn't feel the core seed on him at all. The person in the cloak could not believe it, but seeing Shu's determined look, she knew that the possibility was great. Or should we send someone to kill that kid? The cloaked man said. If there is no absolute certainty at this time, it's better to take less risks. Those tribesmen, when they fight for their lives, will not care about anything. There are only a few people who can be tempted with benefits. Shu said. Seeing that there were already a few birds flying over in the air, Shu said, I'll go back first. I believe that Snowfield City has already started a war with Huoqiu City. Then do I have to stay in Baisher City to watch? The person in the cloak asked. No, you go and tell Su Luan that he can go to Baisher City. The person who came over by the bird wrapped Dao Yu's body with a cloth, put it in a long wooden box, and then left with Shu. As for Xiao Xian taking away the core seed, it was better to talk about it after the desert was finished. At the moment, they had no time to think about it. How much could a tribesman who had never been exposed to this kind of new thing think about it? Even those tribesmen who often came to the desert to rob only robbed some ores, not the core seed that made these ores. Because those tribesmen simply did not know that there was a core seed. Besides, if the core seed was not used properly, it was possible to exterminate the tribe. The tribesmen were so stupid. How could they think of the correct way to use the core seed? Thinking of this, the cloaked man was not worried and went in the direction of Luoya City. Shu also put his main thoughts on the war in the desert. At this time, whether Rock Hill City's plan that had lasted for 3 generations could succeed, or whether Rock Hill City could unify the desert depended on this big storm. However, they did not know that Xiao Xian was not an ordinary tribesman. The use of the core seed, Xiao Xian had even guessed most of it. The rest only needed time to prove the guess. With the core seed, Xiao Xian rushed to the place where Lei and Tuo were. When Xiao Xian saw Lei and Tuo, the two were anxious. Xian, I finally see you. Seeing that Xiao Xian was safe and sound, Lei and Tuo's hanging heart finally relaxed. These days, slaves have been entering the desert. Xian, is there going to be a scuffle in the desert? Tuo asked. Well, it has happened. During this time, the slaves you saw entering the desert, what was each team like? Xiao Xian asked the two to elaborate. Listening to the words of the two, Xiao Xian found that the slaves entering the desert this time, a small number were from other cities, and most of the others may be from Shu's people. Thinking of the buildings and increasing slaves he saw in the place where he met Yan Shuo, maybe it was Shu who used it to raise soldiers. Xiao Xian only knew one place. He did not know about similar places, maybe there were more. Without saying more, Xiao Xian took out a piece of cloth and took a charcoal pencil to write on it. Lei and Tuo had experienced a lot of such things. When they saw Xiao Xian began to write again, they spontaneously stood guard around. When Xiao Xian finished writing, he carefully put the cloth away and handed it to Lei and Tuo together with the animal skin bag with the core seed. You leave now and leave the desert. The things in this animal skin bag are very important. Don't open it privately. You must take it to the tribe and give it to the shaman. Let the shaman see the content of the cloth first. Remember, look at the content of the cloth first. Don't open it before you see it. Moreover, don't let other people know about this, including the people of our tribe. As for what the shaman decides after seeing the content of the cloth, I don't care. If you can't take this thing back, then hide it first. If you can't hide it, then throw it away. Don't let people know you have this. Seeing Xiao Xian's serious face, Lei and Tuo carefully wrote down Xiao Xian's words. Xian, you can rest assured that even if we die, we won't let other people know. But as they talked, the two always felt that something was wrong. Hey, Xian, you won't leave with us? The two just put down their hearts and hung high again. Xiao Xian shook his head. You go first. I have something to do. What else? Is it important? Hearing Xiao Xian say that he will stay in the desert, the two were anxious. Very important. How important? It's about the survival of the tribe. Now the two couldn't say a word. After telling Lei and Tuo, Xiao Xian had to persuade Cha-Cha. This guy was angry. It was rare to persuade people and birds. Xiao Xian looked at the sky, took out a rope and divined. He raised his hand and pointed to a direction. You go that way, it may be safer. Xian, after we send the things back, if you haven't returned to the tribe, we will come to you. Tuo said. Xiao Xian still wanted to say something, but the two had already jumped on the eagle's back and flew into the sky. Looking at the eagle in the sky leaving in the direction he pointed, Xiao Xian rested on a stone for a while and turned back to the depths of the desert. Chapter 343. He had to admit that Shu's words really made Xiao Xian think a lot. Therefore, this time, Xiao Xian also intended to take advantage of the chaos in the desert to find some useful information. After all, it was related to the survival of the tribe. Shu said that the tribe is going to decline. Yes, but also wrong. He was right. In a short time, there certainly would not be such an obvious change. It could not be seen, so he could not be sure. He was wrong, but there were indeed legends that showed such signs. However, rumors were rumors after all. Xiao Xian could not know the truth. Ask the people of other tribes? Xiao Xian was sure that they would not tell the truth. Once again entering the depths of the desert, Xiao Xian planned to go to Loya City to see after learning that Shu had provoked the war. After all, he had cooperated with Su Gu. If he could bring a message in advance, maybe he could make more preparations and suffer less. However, when Xiao Xian approached Loya City, he found that Loya City had already sent troops to Baishar City to start a war. The slaves lined up in neat rows, as well as the equipment on the slaves, did not seem to be a hasty behavior. It was more like they had been prepared for a long time. Such a fast response? Did they know that Dao Yu was dead? Did they know that Baishar City was at its most chaotic and weak time? Seeing this, Xiao Xian could not help but think more. Then thinking of Su Luan's previous attitude, looking at Loya City's quick response, Xiao Xian looked at the tall building in Loya City and narrowed his eyes. Was Su Luan also a person on Shu's side? Or were these two people cooperating? If so, Xiao Xian did not have to worry much. No wonder when he heard that the desert was going to be chaotic, Su Luan remained calm and did not worry at all. In this case, Xiao Xian would not show up. After observing around Loya City for a while, he left. Looking for a place where there was no one, Xiao Xian called Sapphire over. Sapphire had been following Xiao Xian all this while. It had a certain connection with Xiao Xian and could sense Xiao Xian's thoughts. Not long after, Xiao Xian saw the blue beetle emerge from the sand. Now, if the blue beetle stood on the ground, its back would reach Xiao Xian's knees. Its appetite was also huge, not to mention that it was carrying a swarm of insects. Therefore, Xiao Xian did not need to see it to know that there was a massacre under the sand. The other insects and small desert beasts hiding under the sand were lucky if they could escape. Those who couldn't could only be swept away. Looking around, Xiao Xian combined what he knew about the various cities. This place was a certain distance away from the other cities, and very few people would appear in this area. Little shit. Xiao Xian squatted down and looked at the beetle in front of him. Thinking back to when he was enslaved, this beetle was so small. Now, it had grown beyond his expectations. The blue beetle did not quite understand what Xiao Xian wanted to do. It was not until Xiao Xian stretched out his hand and blue flames appeared that it understood. It was so excited that it kicked its hind legs. It had not pushed a ball for a long time, but when it was excited, it could not help but kick its legs. This was a deep-rooted habit. Xiao Xian decided to unlock the second lock for Sapphire. In the past, he felt that there was not enough time. This insect needed enough space to adapt and grow. At the same time, there were too many variables. But now, Xiao Xian found that this insect adapted faster than other beasts. It was not long before it could lead so many beetles to eat meat instead of collectively pushing a ball of dung. Therefore, Xiao Xian decided to unlock another lock for it. If this guy developed well, it could also help him. Not long ago, Sapphire was leading a swarm of insects. After a while, would it develop into a larger-scale insect swarm? Thinking about it, Xiao Xian was still a little excited. He just did not know if it would go too far. Just as Xiao Xian was unlocking the second lock for Sapphire, in a 2-story stone house in Rock Tomb City, Shu had taken Dao Yu's body back to the city and handed it over to an old man. Xiao Xian once asked Su Gu if there was such a person as a witch among the slave owners. Su Gu's answer was yes, but it was extremely rare. After all, once you became a witch, you could not be a slave owner. Moreover, the witches among the slave owners were different from the tribal witches. Most of them were direct descendants and could not enslave slaves. In Luoya City and many other cities, there were no witches. At this time, in front of Shu, the old man with a white whip and strange patterns painted on his body was a witch. His elders were also witches. They belonged to a special family in Rock Tomb City, no less than a small slave owner. The old man was busy dealing with Dao Yu's body. While he was busy, he was also amazed. Sure enough, a slave who broke through the shackles. This bone is hard. Very good, very good. If there were more slaves like this, it would be even better. Shu, who was sitting quietly on the side, suddenly said, what do you say, how about I enslave a few insects? The busy old man was pulling out the internal organs from Dao Yu's body, thinking about when to find more powerful slaves. When he suddenly heard Shu's words, he was so shocked that he almost shook the things in his hands. Nonsense. After saying that, the old man felt that his tone was too much. After all, the person in front of him was Shu, not his direct juniors and subordinates. He slowed down his tone and persuaded, "Young master, how can you enslave such lowly things like insects? Ordinary beasts are already lowly, and those little insects are even more lowly." The old man looked excited, his spittle flying as he said a lot. His meaning was to let Shu choose some powerful slaves, such as those desert beasts, quicksand beasts, giant lizards, and so on. Or he could lure some tribesmen into the desert as slaves. If not, he could also choose something that could scare people. What were insects? That was the way to go. Only those who had no ability would play with insects. It must not be like this. If the old man was in front of his direct juniors or subordinates, at this time, he would probably start directly. But the one who said this was Shu, the young master. No matter how the old man opposed it, no matter how excited he was, he had to think more about his words. Fortunately, Shu still valued the old man very much. He could also listen to some of the old man's words. No matter what he thought in his heart, at least on the surface, he was still humble. Enslaving insects is not good? Shu asked. Very bad, the old man affirmed. Insects are the lowliest of lowly? Shu asked again. Yes, it's beneath the young master's status. The old man was very sincere. Really can enslave? Shu did not give up. Young master, please reconsider. The old man threw the things in his hand into the container next to him. He did not bother to wipe his hands. He gave Shu a big salute and seriously persuaded Shu, hoping that the young master could throw away this bad idea. Shu looked at the old shaman, who bowed in front of him. This person was good at everything and had enough ability. Otherwise, he would not be so valued by his grandfather, father, and himself. But he was a little too stubborn. Once he decided on something, he would not change his mind. He did not expect that just mentioning the insects would cause such a fierce reaction. Therefore, Shu did not say much. He sighed and said, forget it. He did not say anything about Xiao Xian's insects. It was useless to say it. Instead, it would make the old shaman say more and waste his breath. When the old shaman heard Shu's words, his hanging heart was put down. He had always disdained those little things that could be crushed with one finger, especially those without wisdom and were not smart. The old man, who thought that his persuasion was successful, straightened up and continued to work. He applied the medicine to the corpses that had been almost processed and then placed them in a room. When the medicine dried, he wrapped them in a cloth and placed them in a wooden coffin. Since Shu's grandfather's generation, he had been collecting the corpses of dead high-level slaves and making them into corpse slaves. This was a secret technique that several generations of shamans exhausted their efforts to explore and research. Now, in the underground palace where the corpse slaves were placed, there were already thousands of corpse slaves. Once the war broke out and reinforcements were urgently needed, these corpse slaves would be used. This was also a hidden card in Shu's hand that was not known to outsiders. By the way, young master, the tribesman you said had great potential. Will he really come? The old man asked. He will definitely come. Shu was very confident about this. If he doesn't come to me, who can he find? Shu, who thought that he had dug a hole and waited for people to jump in, did not expect that Xiao Xian did not intend to come directly to Rock Tomb City, but went to another city. Chapter 344. Xiao Xian was very wary of Shu. Such a person who could quietly provoke a war was too dangerous. From Shu's words, Xiao Xian felt that the decline of the tribe should be related to the slave owners. If he wanted to find the secrets of the slave owners, it was not only Rock Tomb City. In the three major cities, in addition to Rock Tomb City, there were two other cities. It was said that Snowfield City had already gone to war with Fire Hill City. He did not know how Shu had led the disaster to the east. In any case, the current Snowfield City was also quite chaotic. Since Shu had already started on Snowfield City, naturally he would not let it be peaceful. Snowfield City was known by its name. The place where it was located was similar to the Desert of Beast City, with more ice and snow in a year. When Xiao Xian came to the border of the area under the jurisdiction of Snowfield City, he saw a vast expanse of white snow and some red and purple flowers blooming on the snow. Probably, these plants were unique to Snowfield City. Compared with the desolate Beast City, there were indeed a lot of plants on the Snowfield side. Just now, a team of 200 people had hurried past. They should be going to the battlefield. Everyone's face was serious or sad. The successive wars had made them suffer heavy losses. Now the king was like a madman. All day long, he looked like he was going to fight desperately. No one dared to refute the king's orders. If the king said to continue to fight, they had to continue to fight. Even the people of the three cities, who had been calm for a long time, suddenly came to war. Moreover, it was a large-scale continuous battle. No one could bear it. When Xiao Xian came over, he saw a lot of bones. Some of them had been buried by the sand, and some of them were only partially buried. Many of the bones thrown there were eaten by scavengers, leaving only bones. It looked quite miserable. Xiao Xian collected some clothes of Snowfield City slaves along the way. The clothes of the lower slaves were not much different. After lurking around and observing for a few days, Xiao Xian saw an opportunity. When it was dark, he mixed into the end of a patrol team. The slave walking in front of Xiao Xian was already very sleepy. He did not notice that there was someone behind him. He just yawned and followed the person in front of him. The leader of the group didn't pay much attention to it. He was only on guard against the surroundings and didn't notice that there was an extra person in the group. Seeing the gate of Snowfield City approaching, Xiao Xian pulled the cloth hat on his head. In fact, it was a long piece of cloth wrapped around his head. This was a hat that was commonly worn by low-level slaves. Xiao Xian deliberately dirted his face to show his fatigue. He looked similar to the other slaves. The guard in front of the city gate glanced at the group and didn't notice anything wrong. Looking at Xiao Xian, who was yawning at the end of the group, the guard was glad that he didn't have to run around while guarding the city gate. Looking at the people patrolling outside, it was as if they didn't have enough sleep and didn't have any energy at all. It was already late, and they had all returned from patrolling. They were all busy going back to rest, and no one was in the mood to chat with others. The system here was not perfect. There were many loopholes, which made it convenient for Xiao Xian. After the team entered the city, Xiao Xian found a chance to slip into a sand house. The people walking in front of Xiao Xian in the patrol team seemed to notice something, but when they looked behind them, they didn't see anything unusual. They felt that they were probably too tired and confused, so they didn't care much. The sand house where Xiao Xian was located had no door. The people who lived inside had become cannon fodder in the war and had not returned. Xiao Xian temporarily settled down there, hiding and waiting for the right time. No one came in at night. As the night deepened, there were fewer people outside. There were no lights, and the moonlight was not as bright as the full moon, but it also cast a not too obvious black shadow under the houses. The continuous war made the people in the city tired. Except for the night patrols, everyone else went back to their houses to sleep. Compared with the former Snowfield City, it was now a lot more desolate. Xiao Xian came out of the sand house, avoiding the people patrolling the city, and sneaking into the center of Snowfield City. The palace of Snowfield City was similar to that of Luoya City. It was also very high profile, but it was much larger in scale. The guards near the palace were much stricter. Xiao Xian could not sneak in for the time being. He had to find an opportunity. Therefore, Xiao Xian first found a good hiding place and waited for the right time. The house where he hid was much more spacious than the previous sand houses. The materials of construction were mostly stone. The closer to the palace, the bigger the house was. This house was used to store wine. Xiao Xian saw a lot of wine jars. The wine here was not sold, but used as a reward. When the slaves made a contribution, they would be rewarded with wine. The slaves would come here to receive the reward. There were 3 people in charge of the wine house in the house, and they were already asleep at this time. Xiao Xian chose a place to store goods and hid inside. After looking at the furnishings and layout of the house, Xiao Xian guessed that there should be 5 people in charge here. 2 people were transferred out to join other teams, leaving only 3 people in the house. Not only in charge of the wine house, but also in other similar places. Some people were transferred to patrol the city or guard the city gates. Some were even more miserable and were transferred to the foreign war team. The war consumed a lot of manpower and could only be made up by the slaves working in the city. These people were not skilled in their work. Even if they worked in the city, they did not suffer that much. How could they not complain? The consequence of slacking off was that there were more loopholes, giving people like Xiao Xian an opportunity to take advantage of. Those wine glasses looked like they had not been used for several days, indicating that the people who came to receive the reward had not appeared for several days. Thinking of the war in Snowfield City that he had heard before, Xiao Xian also understood that if they were defeated in succession, where would the reward come from? Even if there were people who made meritorious service, the slave owners would not be in the mood to reward them since they were defeated overall. Having been on the road, hiding and guarding, Xiao Xian was also tired. It was rare to find a temporary place to settle down. He intended to take a good rest and replenish his seriously exhausted mental strength. Of course, even if he fell asleep, the necessary vigilance was also necessary. It was impossible to sleep deeply. He came to Snowfield City with the purpose of finding the history of Snowfield City. Luoya City had a place dedicated to history. Su Gu had told Xiao Xian. As one of the 3 major cities, Snowfield should also have a similar place. Xiao Xian hoped to find more information from the history of Snowfield City to answer the doubts in his heart. If he could see the history, he might be able to explain Shishu's words. Although the slave owners valued those historical records, the degree of importance was much lighter compared to the tribesmen. Even when recording, they would make changes, belittling others and promoting themselves. While Xiao Xian was resting, in the high palace of Snowfield City, the Snowfield King once again flipped the table. The delicate wine glasses and tableware were scattered on the ground, and the wooden table that had just been made was also blown to pieces. Rock Hill City is too much of a bully. The Snowfield King's face was gloomy, his blue veins protruding. He had just received a letter from the Rock Hill City Lord, saying that he should stop and not let the war continue. I'm fighting with the people of Fire Hill. What does it have to do with them? They didn't say anything, but they also turned around and taught me a lesson? The Snowfield King was angry. No, maybe the people of Rock Hill City were also involved in the theft. Thinking of this, the Snowfield King was even more aggrieved. The core seed, that was the core seed, but it was lost. Thinking of the successive defeats, he trembled with anger. At first, he was angry with the tribesmen and wanted to kill the desert tribesmen. However, he got the news that the tribesmen had long slipped away. He then took back all his energy to deal with others. As for the tribesmen, those timid little minions could be dealt with later. The core seed must be in the hands of Fire Hill or Rock Hill City. The Snowfield King did not know that the timid little minions in his eyes had already taken the core seed and were spying on their history. Chapter 345. Xiao Xian hid in the wine house for 4 days. In these 4 days, he also learned a lot from the 3 slaves of the wine house. The 3 people who were close to the city lord palace and had a little bit of power naturally knew more than the lower slaves. Shortly after returning from the Beast City, Snowfield City went to war with the Fire Hill City. The slaves who were chasing the tribesmen were also called back to participate in the war, but the number of defeats was relatively high. Occasionally, when they were about to win, the people of Rock Hill City stepped in and reversed the situation. Snowfield City was once again defeated. In about 20 days, the number of people in Snowfield City had been reduced by more than a third. This was only a rough estimate. The specific number would only increase. However, for the slave owners, the lives of the slaves were not lives. If they were less, they could make up for it later. The important thing was to reverse the situation now. I heard that the king's lost things have still not been found. A slave lowered his voice. It is said that the people of the Fire Hill City stole it. Maybe there are people of Rock Hill City involved in this. Hey, when will this war stop? I don't want to go to war. The slave who had been silent sighed. If this continued, the three of them would be transferred. Now the situation was getting more and more serious. Defeat after defeat made the Snowfield King lose face. His anger soared every day. Because of the Snowfield King's anger, it was not known how many slaves were killed. Every day, slaves could be seen being carried out of the palace. Just then, someone came to look for them outside. The faces of the three slaves tightened, fearing that it was an order to let them participate in the war. However, when they came back in after a while, their expressions were much more relaxed. It turned out to be wine. Scared me. Tomorrow, send the rest of the wine to the palace. No, I have to drink it quickly. After sending it away, I won't be able to drink it. If I want to drink again, I don't know when I'll have to wait. The person who had just passed the message asked them to send the rest of the wine to the palace tomorrow. The king wanted to reward the palace guards with this wine. The palace guards are good. I heard that they can eat and drink a lot of good things. It's good, but recently, a lot of people have been killed by the king. There were also many guards who died because of anger, which made the guards more or less have some other thoughts in their hearts. The Snowfield King ordered the people in the wine house to send the rest of the wine to the palace in order to appease the guards' hearts. As the three of them drank and chatted, Xiao Xian, who was hiding in the utility room, also had an idea. He had been waiting for an opportunity all this time, and this time it was worth a try. If he missed it, who knew how long he would have to wait? Before nightfall, the three slaves put all the large and small jars of wine into 2 large wooden boxes. Because they had drunk some privately, several jars of wine were mixed with other things because the wine was not enough. Anyway, these wines were given to other slaves, so there was no need to pay much attention to them. After loading the wine, the 3 slaves went to sleep. Xiao Xian took advantage of the time when they were sleeping to add something to their room so that they could sleep more soundly. Fortunately, in order to sneak into Snowfield City, Xiao Xian had prepared a lot of desert medicinal plants along the way. When the 3 people fell asleep and made some movements, they did not respond at all. Xiao Xian went to the box of wine and took out the wine placed inside. He cut a wooden board of the utility room into a suitable size and put it in the big box of wine. He felt that it was good. The wine jars were placed on the wooden board. Xiao Xian stood in the wooden box and then steadily lifted the wooden board with the wine. This thing was nothing to Xiao Xian. It was much lighter than the stones he used to lift. He slowly lowered his body and used his hands and feet to carefully hold the wooden board with the wine jars and slowly put it down. After hiding the wooden board and the wine jars, Xiao Xian moved his fingers. The sound of the silk thread flicking was heard, and the lid of the wooden box was accurately closed. Taking back the silk thread, Xiao Xian took a little rest and waited for tomorrow to come. The next day, the 3 slaves were still sleeping. Because of Xiao Xian's addition, the 3 people not only slept deeply, but also woke up later than usual. So when the people carrying the wine came, the 3 slaves in the wine house were still sleeping. Some of the slaves carrying the wine were palace guards. It was rare to hear that the king wanted to reward them with something. Naturally, they were very active and specially brought people to carry it. Seeing that the 3 people in the wine house were still sleeping, they kicked the door open and rudely woke the 3 people up. Regardless of the confused and absent-minded 3 people, they went directly to the place where the wine was stored. When they saw that the 2 big boxes had been packed, they were satisfied. They opened the lid and looked inside, complaining that there was not enough wine. They dug out all the wine hidden by the 3 people in the wine house and threw it all into the wooden box. When the wooden box was full, they held it by themselves. When the guards took the wooden box away, Xiao Xian could not see the expressions of the 3 people in the wine house. But when he thought about it, he knew that the 3 people must be cursing in their hearts. It was not easy to hide a little, but it was all taken away. Because it was the palace guards who carried the wine, the guards at the gate of the palace did not check it strictly. They also talked and laughed with the people who carried the wine, discussing when the wine would be distributed. The wooden box was carried to the cargo room. Although the slaves guarding it were eager, they also knew that the reward had to be arranged by the slave owners. If they privately divided it, they would be scolded. They only secretly took 2 small bottles of wine from the box and hid them in their clothes before leaving. When the people carrying the wine left, Xiao Xian listened to the movements outside. There was no one around, so he came out of the box. It was quite difficult to quietly come out from under the box piled with wine jars. Fortunately, Xiao Xian's strength was great, and he was stable. If it was replaced by a weaker person with poor balance, it would be impossible. When he came out, a bottle almost fell to the ground. Xiao Xian quickly used his foot to cushion the fall and let the bottle land safely without making a big sound. Although it did not take much time to come out of the wooden box, the difficulty factor was high. After completing it, Xiao Xian was sweating. Putting the wooden board in an inconspicuous corner, he put the bottle back into the wooden box and closed the lid. Xiao Xian waited until there were no guards outside before he slipped out. The palace in Snowfield City was larger than the one in Luoya City. Xiao Xian was not clear about the layout here. He just walked and hid, avoiding the patrolling slaves. For those places with layers of guards, Xiao Xian also temporarily avoided them. Those places should be where the slave owners were. Looking at the layout of the palace, there were basically only a few places that were heavily guarded. Other places were only guarded by a small number of slaves. They were also very loose, with low morale and no spirit. In the place with few guards, Xiao Xian looked for a small circle. He heard two young men and women whispering about the stone room where the notes were hidden. Xiao Xian quietly followed them. The two were not husband and wife, but they behaved intimately. They did not let the slaves follow them, and went to the stone room where the notes were placed. Here, it should be a place similar to a bookstore. There were 3 slaves at the door of the stone room. 2 of them were relatively young, and the other was very old and blind. Second young master. The 3 people respectfully saluted. The man called the second young master waved his hand and pointed to the blind old man. You stay, the others go. The 3 slaves seemed to have known this would happen. They did not need the second young master to say more. The other 2 hurriedly left, leaving only the blind old slave to follow the man and woman into a room next to the stone room. Chapter 346. Not long after the 3 of them went in, Xiao Xian heard obscene sounds and the voice of the blind old slave reciting books. In many desert cities, some slave owners were not willing to look at the records left by their ancestors. They could not bear to memorize them, and they were told to treat them with care and not damage them. Over time, fewer and fewer people went to see the records of their ancestors. Later, a slave owner had a brainwave and arranged for his slaves to read the records. He also ordered them to memorize all the records they had read. Whenever he wanted to know something, the slaves who were responsible for memorizing it would skillfully recite it. Thus, there was a class of slaves who were responsible for memorizing. Their full responsibility was to memorize all the records for their masters. These people were like living records that the slave owners could take with them at any time. If they wanted to know something, they just had to ask. They could even beat and scold them at will. Listening to the sounds next door, Xiao Xian, who had sneaked into the stone room, thought, "Those 2 people are really in high spirits. They are messing around and listening to books at the same time." However, the old slave's voice did not fluctuate. It was very calm and was not affected by the 2 people. He was calmer than Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian did not know if it was because of his deep experience. Xiao Xian did not have time to think about the chaotic relationship between the slave owners. There were a lot of animal skin scrolls, wood scrolls, cloth scrolls, and so on in the stone room. This made Xiao Xian very excited. He finally found it. Looking at the classification above, there were also smelting-related books. Xiao Xian looked through them. These records were very old. Some of them were not well preserved. If he used a little more strength, he would have broken them. It recorded the core seed and where the ore for smelting came from. It was similar to what Xiao Xian thought. If the stone was placed around the core seed, it would change over time and become ore. The stone at different distances from the core seed would have different smelting methods because the metal obtained was different. The better the quality of the stone, the shorter the time needed and the higher the metal content. Xiao Xian looked through the smelting methods described in it. There were records of failure and success. Looking at these records, Xiao Xian felt that the ancestors of the slave owners seemed to have been exposed to smelting for a long time. It was not something they discovered and tried. In this regard, Xiao Xian had to find the origin of the slave owners, about their more ancient history. However, probably too long ago, Xiao Xian really could not find a place to put it. He looked through a lot and did not find what he wanted. At this time, the man and woman next door had finished their business and left laughing. Xiao Xian put down the things in his hands and hid behind the stone shelf. The curtain at the door of the stone room was opened. And footsteps. Of footsteps into the stone room. It wasn't light at all, and every step was rather slow. These were the footsteps of the blind old slave. Xiao Xian heard the sound of the old slave pouring water and seemed to think of something. The old slave sighed, then got up and walked over to where Xiao Xian was hiding. Outside the window, Yang Guang's light came in. Xiao Xian could see the other person's elongated shadow getting closer and closer. He silently took out the knife in his hand. When the other person was 5 meters away from himself, Xiao Xian suddenly got up and took 2 big steps. In an instant, he was in front of the blind old slave. The blade of the knife slashed at the old slave's throat. However, before he could cut, Xiao Xian stopped. Looking at the still calm old slave, Xiao Xian did not move the knife away. He carefully looked at the man. There was no one else outside the stone room. Inside the stone room, there was only Xiao Xian and the blind old slave. Something was wrong. "Are you not afraid?" Xiao Xian asked in a low voice. "Why should I be afraid?" The old slave's voice was gentle. "Aren't you going to call for help?" Xiao Xian asked again. "Why should I call for help?" The old slave's voice was still gentle. Xiao Xian looked at the man again. He was blind and did not seem to have the strength to fight. He was even a little sick and weak. "How did you find me?" Xiao Xian asked. "Smell. There is the smell of fruit wine." The old slave pointed out seriously. This time, Xiao Xian was really surprised. In order to be more hidden, Xiao Xian had changed his clothes after sneaking into the palace. The smell of wine was very light. Even the guards could not detect it. But now, it was actually smelled by the old slave. Seemingly aware of Xiao Xian's doubts, the old slave continued, "I am already familiar with the smell here. As long as there is a slight change, I will be able to detect it." The old slave did not care about Xiao Xian's movements at all. He also dragged a stool and sat down leisurely. It looked like he was going to continue chatting with Xiao Xian. This made Xiao Xian wonder if the old slave had mistaken him for another slave owner in Snowfield City. However, the old slave's next words overturned Xiao Xian's guess. "Why did you sneak into Snowfield City?" The old slave asked, but did not get a reply from Xiao Xian. He said, "At this time, sneaking into Snowfield City and coming to the place where the records are stored. Are you from another city?" Without waiting for Xiao Xian to answer, the old slave shook his head and said, "I don't think so. I can feel that you have just looked through the place. Are you interested in the slave owners? Most of the slave owners don't pay attention to the records of their ancestors. So, are you a tribesman?" In the process, Xiao Xian did not answer a word, but the old slave said the answer in a gentle tone. No, in the end, the old slave's voice still had a hint of curiosity and interest, without any fear or worry. "Was this really a slave of Snowfield City? What do you want to know? Just ask me directly. You don't have to look through it," the blind old slave said, looking at Xiao Xian with a pair of strangely sunken, white and muddy eyes, waiting for Xiao Xian's words. Xiao Xian thought for a moment, temporarily retracting the knife in his hand, and asked, "What is the relationship between the slave owner and the slave?" If other people heard this, they would certainly despise him and say, "Nonsense, of course it is the master-servant relationship." However, the blind old slave was not like this. Hearing Xiao Xian's question, the old slave thought for a moment and sighed, "The slave owner and the slave. The slave owner enslaved the slave. It is like planting a seed that has no chance to germinate in the land under his jurisdiction, giving them a chance to grow. Later, the slave owner can also harvest the fruit. However, there are several barriers around the seed. If the barriers are not removed, even if the seed can successfully germinate, its growth will be limited. The slave owners remove the chains, which is like removing the barriers that block the growth of the plants, so that they can continue to grow. When the slave owner dies, it is equivalent to no one taking care of these growing plants. The barriers are still the same. If you are lucky and a slave owner is willing to take over, the plant can be uprooted from the ground and then planted in the place under the jurisdiction of the new slave owner. The size of the plant will not change, and the extent to which it grows is still the same as before. However, there was always a problem with transplanting plants. If something went wrong during the transplanting process, such as the roots and other core areas being damaged, or if there were other abnormalities during the transplanting process, the plant would die before it could be replanted. Just as there is a certain mortality rate when a slave owner changes owners, if there is any mistake in the process of changing owners, the slave will die. Therefore, a slave changing owner is like transplanting. There is a risk in it. If you are unlucky, not only will you not have the chance to continue to grow, but you will also lose your life. As for breaking through the shackles, not every seed planted by the slave owner can break through the barriers by itself. Even if it breaks through smoothly, the situation of broken branches and leaves will appear. In serious cases, it will even affect the original power obtained. This is the same principle as slaves breaking through the shackles. In the earliest days, the slave owners would not easily remove the chains on the slaves unless they had been slaves for generations, and they were all loyal slaves. Only then would the slave owners remove the chains for them. But later, in order to compete, fight, and war, unlocking the chains became common. Xiao Xian listened to the old slave's answer. While writing down these words, he marveled at the old slave's knowledge. It seemed that this old slave really knew a lot. The blind old slave in front of him was just a low-level slave. In terms of strength, he was not even as good as other low-level slaves. At such an old age, he was also sick. Any low-level slave could kill him with his bare hands. However, such a person had memorized almost half of the records stored in the stone room. Moreover, after summarizing these things, he told Xiao Xian in more concise words. Overconfident, arrogant, not putting other people in his eyes, self-righteous. If he continues like this, he will eventually go to destruction. In the end, the old slave sighed. There are more and more rebellious slaves. The old slave even recited a copy of the Guilty Slave volume, which was written by the slave owners of Snowfield City. It listed the influential high-level slaves who had rebelled in Snowfield City in the past 1,000 years. The people who wrote it said that those high-level slaves were heinous, ungrateful, and unscrupulous. They got the ability from the slave owners, but they still chose to rebel. It was simply not enough for them to die. There was no doubt that every slave in the Guilty Slave volume died very miserably, but when the old slave said it, there was a sense of pity. Was it a pity that the slaves who betrayed the slave owners did not succeed? Or was it a pity for others? Xiao Xian did not know. Seeing that the old slave continued to feel pity for the slaves, Xiao Xian quickly pulled the topic back. How much do you know about the tribe's fire seed? Xiao Xian asked. Fire seed? It's really a nostalgic word. The old slave paused and seemed to recall a memory from a long time ago. I don't know much about this. I only know that the tribe's fire seed is getting weaker. You tribesmen seem to be looking for a solution. The old slave could not answer more questions about the fire seed. Xiao Xian was a little disappointed, but it was already very good that the old slave knew this. If the slave owners of Snowfield City can preserve the records left by their ancestors, maybe you can find the answer you want. Unfortunately, too much is destroyed. The old slave was very emotional. Xiao Xian's face changed. Could it be that he really wanted to go to Shirshu? Knowing that Shirshu had dug a pit there, he still wanted to jump in? Xiao Xian was really hesitant. Unable to get the question about the fire seed, Xiao Xian asked a question he had always wondered. Where do the slave owners come from? From the sea. The old slave said. Xiao Xian, do you think I'm an idiot? Chapter 347. From the sea? Xiao Xian could not imagine this, unless the slave owners were mermaids. However, this seemed impossible. Living in the desert for so many years, how could they be marine creatures? Even if they evolved, it would be a process. After hearing the blind old slave's answer, Xiao Xian's first reaction was that he did not believe it. His second reaction was that he still did not believe it. However, the other person's face was serious, which made Xiao Xian helpless. What does it mean to come from the sea? Xiao Xian asked. The blind old slave shook his head. I'm not very clear, but I heard some people say before that the slave owners came from there. Xiao Xian still had doubts about this. After thinking about it, he asked the old slave about the map of the desert. The map that Su Gu gave to Xiao Xian was not comprehensive. Xiao Xian hoped to see a more complete map here. After all, it was one of the 3 major cities. How could there not be a complete map? For maps, the old slave did not know much. He was blind in his early years. Many of the things that he memorized were only remembered after listening to others read them. Pictures and the like were more difficult. Although he did not remember, the old slave knew the approximate location where the map was placed. He went to the side of the stone shelf and raised his hand to mark a range. It should be in this area. You look for it. Although his eyes could not see, he clearly remembered what kind of notes were placed on which piece. Xiao Xian carefully rummaged and finally found a few animal skin rolls that looked like maps. This hasn't been touched for some years. You should be careful, the old slave said. It was indeed old enough. Even if the animal skin was carefully protected in the early stage and usually cared for, the quality of the animal skin was not excellent. With a little negligence, it could easily be damaged. The map drawn on the animal skin roll was very simple, and the scale was not good. It only marked the approximate location of the desert cities and some important places. Some of the areas painted dark on the side should be the sea. Xiao Xian memorized all of this, then put the map back. After flipping through a few more notes, Xiao Xian stopped. The blind old slave held some notes and put them in the place where Yang Guang was to dry them in the sun to prevent them from being eaten by insects or moldy. Although he could not see, it was not difficult to do such things for a long time. He could also feel where Yang Guang was. If you have nothing else to do, leave this place as soon as possible, the old slave said. Yes. Xiao Xian also did not intend to stay for a long time. Recently, there were more things in Snowfield City. Xiao Xian intended to leave later. Don't wait until sunset. After sunset, the defense in the palace will be stricter than during the day. The blind old slave said. Xiao Xian's face changed. He really intended to wait until sunset to act. He did not expect that the palace of Snowfield City would be like this. Could it be that the Snowfield King was often assassinated at night, so he strengthened the defense at night? No wonder the man and woman before came out to fool around during the day instead of at night. Good. Xiao Xian thanked the old slave and watched the old slave carefully move the notes made of different materials. Before listening to the old man's tone, he could hear that he did not have a good view of the slave owners. He even admired those historical traders. But for these notes left by the former slave owners, he cherished them very much. Thinking of this person's talent for reciting books, if it was in a more advanced peaceful era, he might be a talent for learning. What a pity. How did you lose your sight? After Xiao Xian asked this sentence, he felt that it was impolite to ask this question. It was like exposing people's scars. Seeing that the old slave did not speak, Xiao Xian intended to change the topic, but he heard the old slave calmly say, "When I was very young, I became a slave of the previous Snowfield King with others. Once I looked at the notes in his hand. The king was in a bad mood and was very angry. I accepted the punishment." The old slave still remembered that at that time, after the king stabbed his eyes, he threw him to the side of the stone room and said, "Don't you like to watch? Then watch enough here." The blind slave could not see the words on the notes, but he begged others to read them to him. He wrote down all the notes he had heard and recited them every day. Xiao Xian heard the words and sighed again. What a pity. Before leaving, Xiao Xian also intended to leave some herbs. There were no herbs to strengthen the body, but there were still some left to treat trauma. The old slave refused. "You need it more," the old slave said. "You." Xiao Xian looked at the sick old man. If he continued like this, not to mention the pain caused by the injuries, he would not be able to persist for long. Anyway, there is not much time left. The old slave was open-minded and waved his hand. "Let's go. By the way, you have to be careful of the bailuo." "What is a bailuo?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's a desert beast domesticated by Snowfield City. It's not big and usually hides in the palace. Their sense of smell is very keen. If you are not stared at by them, you will rarely be able to escape," the old slave said. "After I sneaked into the palace, I did not encounter it," Xiao Xian said. The old slave was not clear about this. After all, his range of activities was limited to the stone room where the notes were placed. He heard other things from others. Maybe the bailuo stayed near the king's palace. The old slave said, "But you still have to be careful." "Well, I know. You can rest assured." Xiao Xian thanked him again and left the stone room. After Xiao Xian left, the old slave sat there quietly. Although he could not see, he could feel the direction of the window. At this time, he had been staring out of the window. His family had been slaves for generations. His ancestors had also become the king's guards. Until his generation, he was sent here early to guard this small stone room. He remembered an old man who used to read notes to him. Before he died, he told him that one day, the current system would be replaced by another system. During this time, he could not go out, but he could feel the changes in the palace of Snowfield City. He could speculate a lot of things based on other people's conversations. He also had an intuition that Snowfield City was in danger. He had just said to Xiao Xian that there is not much time left. He was not only talking about himself, but also alluding to Snowfield City. While the old slave was meditating, on the other side Xiao Xian, who had left the stone room, quietly looked around. There were not many people around. Probably because there were no slave owners living nearby, he did not see anyone except for some routine patrols. Xiao Xian entered from the main entrance of the palace. As for the place to leave, he planned to escape from the back door or other side doors. The palace was surrounded by high and thick walls. There were people guarding inside and outside. Xiao Xian could not easily get out. He could only look at other side doors. Sneaking in, Xiao Xian suddenly had a sense of crisis of being watched. Was he exposed? He quickly looked around and fixed his eyes on one place. There was a tree there, and on one of its branches hung an oval object not much bigger than a fist. At this time, the oval thing on the branch was stretching out, the rolled-up body elongated, and the retracted wings spread out. The nose, which was almost as long as the rest of the body, unfolded and elongated, pointing straight at Xiao Xian's position. Bai Luo. Xiao Xian thought of the creatures mentioned by the blind old slave. If you are not stared at by them, you can rarely escape. This was the old slave's evaluation of the Bai Luo. Xiao Xian did not waste any more time and ran away. He wanted to kill the Bai Luo first, but he had noticed that there were other similar sites around, indicating that there were many hidden Bai Luos nearby, and they were all focused on him. The Bai Luos in the palace were not all around the king's palace. Some of them found a quiet place to sleep. Unexpectedly, they met Xiao Xian and recognized that Xiao Xian was not a native of the city. Beep, a sharp whistle-like sound was emitted from the Bai Luo's long nose. This was like a signal, and the other Bai Luos around also made a sound and flew in the direction of Xiao Xian's escape. The guards around heard the sound and all gathered in the place where the Bai Luo was, shouting, "Someone is invading." However, Xiao Xian's speed was also fast. He already knew where the nearest door was and went straight there. There were no other slave owners living around, and the king and the young masters raised several giant beasts around here. At this time, a Snowfield young master was watching the slaves helping him train the giant beasts. When he heard that someone was invading, and it seemed that there was only one person, he immediately became excited. This was an opportunity to make a contribution. Go and catch the intruder. The other slaves who followed felt bitter. Catching the intruder was the job of the guards. Why did you, a young master, have to get involved? But when the master went over, the slaves couldn't just stand by and watch. They could only grit their teeth and follow. Xiao Xian was like a sharp knife, splitting the encirclement in front of him. Listening to the movement behind him, he caught a glimpse of a large stone that was nearly as tall as a person. It was engraved with the words Beast Garden. Xiao Xian didn't care whether it was the Beast Garden or the Human Garden. He picked up the stone that was nearly as tall as a person, turned around, and threw it out. Because the young master was chasing with the giant beast, some guards didn't dare to get too close for fear of being accidentally injured by the giant beast. The rampaging giant beast roared as if it wanted to flatten everything. However, it didn't wait for long before a stone was thrown in its face. Its nose was hit hard, and it suddenly had a nosebleed. Its footsteps were a little staggered. Its feet were tripped by something, and its two front legs fell heavily to the ground. Its body continued to move forward and hit a row of houses. Boom! Boom! The houses here were not the reinforced walls of the Colosseum. Under the violent impact of the giant beast, they instantly fell down. Seeing this scene, the other slaves were full of disbelief. Unexpectedly, they directly threw such a big stone like a ball. Although there was no lack of strong people among the slaves, it was not so exaggerated. Compared with the person who just threw the stone at the giant beast, it was still a little worse. The young slave owner who fell from the giant beast didn't care about the injuries on his body. He shouted, "Tie that man up for me. I want him to be my slave." There were a lot of guards shooting arrows around, but Xiao Xian's speed was fast. Coupled with the chaos just now, he didn't wait for the guards in other places to come. He was already close to the back door of the palace. You're tuning in to the Bli Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.